Morning. We've got a very full agenda this morning. So I'm trying to make sure we're on time.
Thank you. This is Ed Hamrick, Assistant Attorney General, and I represent the State Board of Land. This morning, the board was in executive session to discuss two matters that have been noticed on its public agenda for executive session, namely the Catching case in San Miguel District Court, case number 21CV 3013, and the Phillips case, most recently on remand to the Colorado Court of Appeals, case number 20CA 2021. These matters were authorized for executive session under 24.6, 402, 3A2, and 3 of the Colorado Revised Statute. The discussion was limited to privileged attorney-client communication and background matters of the cases. No decisions were reached in executive session. We are now out of executive session and ready to proceed towards the regular agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. This is the regular meeting of the Colorado State Land Board of Commissioners, Thursday, December 15, 2022. And the first, and there is a full slate of commissioners. There are 4 present and 1 Commissioner Stillman is present in Zoom. The first item on our agenda is open public comment period for non-agenda items. And last, if you have any member of the public who wishes to make a comment, and if there is anyone present who also like to make a comment.
We have any public in the room? Nobody here. And folks listening online, if you would like to make a comment on an item that's not on our agenda today, now's the opportunity. Use the raise hand feature on your viewer window, and we can bring you forward to address the board. Commissioner, I'm not seeing any hands.
All right. Well, for those who might be watching on Zoom, we are this morning in the Grant Humphreys mansion. It does look a little festive. This was Alvin and Mom's here. We'll move forward then with announcements.
No announcements.
And the Department of Natural Resources and Technical Director. Someone, Vanessa.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you to the opportunity. I'm Vanessa Mazal with the Department of Natural Resources on behalf of our executive. Good morning. Let's see, starting this morning with budget, we are in joint budget committee hearings this week. So not much to report until we have some outcomes from that. We'll submit a supplemental budget. It's due on January 3rd. So some supplemental items from previously submitted budget. Staffing, quite a few staffing updates that are relevant. We have you're interviewing right now for the assistant director of is a new position with NTNR. Director for Energy Innovation. I think we spoke about that last time. That person hopefully will be on board beginning of the year, this beginning of the year. It's a very important position with a lot of different branch fronts. So we're excited about that. We have shifted listing for our tribal liaison position for a few weeks. I think that now maybe we post that. There are two new, we also important for us here is we have a new legislative director. Her name is Daphne Gervais. She came to us from Colorado Counties Inc. She's got great experience with natural resources, local government. She will be replacing Alice Horton, who's been serving as assistant director of Parks and Wildlife since Bill Sachs' departure, and eventually will post for that position, and that will make my life a bit easier. We have two new regional water plan grant administrators for CWCB, the Colorado Water Conservation Board as well. On the legislative front, we're still working on our legislative agenda and priorities for this upcoming session of the governor's office. More to report on that, I think, in January. CPW has posted for the new director position for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, that is. And that position is open right now. That person will be replacing Heather Duggan, who's been serving as director for the last 6 or 8 months or so.
Is Heather?
I can't answer that question.
I didn't know. It was public knowledge or not.
To be honest, I don't know, and if I did know, I'm not sure. But I have no idea.
I should have probably said.
No, I really don't know the answer to that, so apologies for that. I would say that there's a lot of she has. She's been really, this has been a tough 6 months, and she's been doing a really great job. So, yes, absolutely. Let's see, it's the Colorado, so also sticking with the CPW theme for a moment. This past week, on the 9th, CPW submitted the draft wolf reintroduction management plan, which is now been open for public comment, and there are opportunities both online and in person to provide feedback. The Parks and Wildlife Commission will be reviewing that plan. Okay, moving on to Colorado State Forest Service. I believe that now the Forest Service is launching in partnership with the National Forest Service, San Juan National Forest, now administering the Zwicker Good Neighbor Authority timber sale, which was initiated to provide access to a state record parcel, as well as to expand the footprint for a healthy forest down in the southwest part of the state. I don't have a lot more information on this, but I'm happy to be interested in more. And on the Colorado Water Conservation Board, they're incorporating their public comment period closed, I believe, last month, and they're now incorporating public comment into their over 500 comments into their draft water plan revision due this spring. Let's see, on the federal side of things, a few things to report. The Bureau of Land Management in the Department of Interior has quite a few things going on. One of them is that the Secretary of Interior has announced that they will be considering mineral withdrawal for the Thompson Divide area, which is in Pitkin and Garfield County. This would be a significant mineral withdrawal. I believe it's 275 roughly 1,000 acres, and then a number of other, I'm going to botch the numbers because I don't have them in front of me, but a number of other federal minerals within that area, on the White National Forest, and then the Gunnison National Forest, and then a few BLM offices, the Colorado River Valley, as well as the Compaglia and Gunnison field offices. So it's a significant effort. It's sort of in response to a lot of advocacy that's been done to withdraw that area and prioritize it for conservation and recreation. And it's consistent with the title in the CORE Act that our two Colorado senators have been championing in Congress, as well as Representative Lewis from the Central District. Let's see. Also, the BLM headquarters announced that they will be undertaking a revision of their programmatic environmental impact statement and management plan. I believe it's a management plan amendment, or it will be to amend future management plans with respect to their utility scale solar planning for federal lands. We have had all the previous plan, which was released in 2012, I would say, identified several areas as solar energy zones within the San Luis Valley, but they've had a lack of transmission capacity there, so there've been 0 proposals on plans, and where they have had some proposals to review, there've been this permitting has been pretty slow. So part of the goal for this process would be to encourage to some degree where it's appropriate in low conflict areas, more streamlined permitting decisions and identify prior places for solar development plants, specifically rather on BLM lands, not forest areas. And then I think we've talked a little bit about the large scale planning initiatives that are taking place right now, the resource management plan amendments to address the needs of greater sage grouse, listed species, threatened listed species, Gunnison sage grouse, and then also our large scale big game planning initiative, statewide big game planning initiative. Related to that, I wanted to announce that the BLM has also issued some new internal policies that essentially require them to address the needs of wildlife species and habitat connectivity in particular in future land use plans. So we got a little bit ahead of the game, and I think we're still working with the BLM to sort of narrow the scope and see if this has significance for our existing plan initiatives. Also, we understand that there's likely to be movement in Q1 on the Eastern Colorado Resource Management Plan, which covers the entire eastern part of the state, including the 2 grasslands, national grasslands. Mineral development on those 2 grasslands. Also sticking with the Eastern Plains theme for just a moment, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service issued a final rule listing the lesser prairie chicken, 2 populations of the lesser prairie chicken species, which affects the southwestern part of the state, 7 counties in eastern Colorado, including certainly quite a lot of state land where it went on. And the northern population, which is the Colorado population, that affects Kansas and Colorado and Oklahoma, rather. That population is listed as threatened, and the southern population is listed as endangered. And the difference between those 2 is that the northern population is accompanied by what's called a 4U under the Endangered Species Act. And this provides for some allowances for incidental take, for incidental harm or killing or harassment of the species populations due to the 4D rule specifies that it's due to existing agricultural practices that would be routine agricultural practices on existing cultivated land. So does not provide for the same on new cropland. And also for raising practices that are under a Fish and Wildlife Service appointed or approved raising management plan. So that might affect some lessees within realms. So that would be mentioned as well. Also introduces some new setbacks within this habitat range for wind and power transmission lines. Wind infrastructure and power transmission lines that the chickens really don't like tall structures, and so it's a challenge. But happy to provide information on that. And I think that'll do it for me, unless there are other questions.
I just have one concerning Colorado River issues, changes to the staff.
No, it's out. So Becky Mitchell will be moving to, as I mentioned last time, I think we're still moving into the role of commissioner. We do have those 3 policy positions that are coming online. I believe there's 3 that are sitting, and I'm not sure if they all sit within the governor's office or if some of them are chaired by Water Conservation Board, but nevertheless, we'll be getting a Colorado River specific policy director, which would be fantastic. A huge relief for those of us that work on those issues, and for Kelly and our office, especially as we head to state issues in their state season. And then Lauren, this will be taking the director position. The meantime, and I think that's about as far as the updates go. There are some other updates related to there's always so much.
And do you anticipate the legislation this session in terms of the content?
Within the state, there have been certainly discussions. I don't know that I'm not sure that we've finalized, and we have not finalized, I think, any particular legislation we have gotten behind. I've certainly heard rumblings of some. I don't know that there's but I can certainly. I don't need to get to that. I will say that there are quite a few bills that are making their way through the lame duck session encounters that do affect the Colorado River. Also, including one that we've been working on trying to get a temporary reauthorization for the Upper Colorado Fish Program and San Juan Endangered Fish Program. But those have not, but we'll see what ends up making its way through the machinery there. Oh, one other quick mention. Since we've talked about the America the Beautiful program, and I gave you an update on that in June, I believe. Pretty exciting news. Sadly, none of the three DNR applications for the large scale funding opportunity that was administered through the the large scale funding opportunity. None of our applications got through, which is very sad. However, the Colorado Department of Agriculture did get $4 million in funding for a significant project that addresses essentially restoration of plants, and will hopefully have some benefits to watersheds and other large scale benefits. But it's essentially zero restoration. So, and it's kind of a statewide. I think they're still determining where the problem is.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Commissioner Eads, can I have 30 seconds to fiddle with the audio? Folks that are listening online, I know that the audio is coming through kind of rough. We've got a very challenging room today. So I'm gonna just try to restart it real quick. Please give me 30 seconds.
And would it help us, next item is business that will come before the board, and that is on the purchase option instruct with written. So now.
Good morning, commissioners. Mal LaFontaine, I'm position disposition manager. And this morning, I have in front of you just an information item to provide a little more information on what the revenue purchase option construct may look like, and also to provide an initial timeline for what the first phase of those may look like. These were two items that the board specifically asked for additional information on at our November meeting, and hopefully this sets the stage for our January action. Please ask any questions as I go through this, or either way.
So before we do that, maybe is there a way you can say if there are people online listening, do you have a way for them to, are they able to hear initially?
I've got staff pinging me on my phone and they're letting me know that it's rough, but anybody want to comment if it's gotten any better? Well, shoot me a chat, a Google chat, and I'll see it.
I can speak louder too.
And Matt, I'm gonna
Sure, pull that
that
mic
microphone in a little bit. I just want to make sure I know this is of interest to folks. So thanks, Matt. Let's go ahead with.
Nick, it's about the same, but if you speak a little louder, I think that's helpful.
All right. So once again, we have the revenue purchase option construct. There's no action on this, but it is in the report. Now, please continue.
Thank you. So one of the early identified unique aspects of these potential transactions is that REPI funding is made available kind of on a staggered annual basis, but not typically in chunks large enough to buy our entire products at one time. So staff and TNC and TPL have worked through an alternative mechanism by which we could complete these transactions, which would be through a purchase option. And typically, when the board sells a ranch or any of its real property holdings, it does so in a single transaction. A purchase option would provide a contractual right to a buying party to do it in a phased manner over time and through a series of individual closings. The same general statutory requirements would apply to this purchase option offering that do apply to any state land board transactions. Specifically, there will be a broad public noticing, which will be within the board's materials on the board's website, and also in the weekly county paper. There will be a minimum bid set for the purchase offer. Staff's recommendation at this time is that be a $50,000 fee that would be creditable to the first phase closing. Any of the actual phase closings would occur at appraised values. The first phase closing appraisal would be made available to the board prior to making the decision to move forward with the offering. And then subsequent then current appraisals would be obtained for the phases on a time appropriate basis, each one within 12 months of the actual phase closing.
I just had a quick question on that. I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Chavez. Where the transactions will be completed at appraised mark, or wouldn't it be at a or above if there was other bidders that were interested, or is this just because I know we're focused on TNC?
Sure. So the actual bidding variable is going to be the purchase option itself. So the minimum bid will be set at $50,000. Parties will bid on that and could pay above that amount, with the first $50,000 being creditable to the first closing. But the actual phase transactions are contemplated to occur at appraised value. To expand on that a little bit, the board will have an approval and review right for each of the appraisals to ensure that that appraised values and the appraisals themselves are in line with board expectations.
So I have a question about that. So I know as part of the public process, we have to do public bids, but we're only doing this because we want it to be military acquisition. So how does one balance that in terms of this will in fact look like an offering of land available for sale? So I guess I'm clearer about
Sure.
how that's done.
Staff's view on that, and what I would put forth to the board, is it's not that that the board is seeking a transaction with TNC and TPL or with the military in general. Rather that it's seeking disposals that will achieve certain conservation objectives, and that any party who can provide those conservation objectives would be able to participate in this process.
So I guess, Mr. Hammer, let me just feel comfortable with how that works.
Well, again, the transaction will be noticed as required by statute and with the requirements, and any economic participants who want to participate in the process will have an opportunity to, and then the proposals will be evaluated to meet the objectives that are presented. All transactions that the land board exposes and notices, the land board reserves the right to reject any and all proposals. So if they don't meet the goals that are set forth on the transaction, the land board does not have to move forward with a transaction that doesn't meet its goals. And so we are confident or optimistic or somewhere between the two that when noticed, we will have bidders who are coming together to achieve those goals, and the land board will be both made economically whole and achieve its other additional goals as well through this process. But we do think it is different, but we think it passes all the requirements.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, I was going to say, as I've thought about this too, Josie, in this process, and I generally support how the transaction is being presented, consistent with the land board's operations generally or guidelines. Here, the one nuance that is important outcome is the bidding on the purchase option, which is also a little bit unusual, but the purchase option gives any buyer the right to acquire this property subject to the requirement that they place a DOD negotiated and approved easement on it. And that's kind of a piece that really would narrow down, I think, the field of bidders.
No, I completely support that idea. I just want to be transparent with the public that there is this very tight criteria in that I think there's a matter of trust that we want to be open, that we have a very narrow definition of who might be eligible.
And again, just to stress, as Matt said, the goal isn't necessarily to restrict the bidders, it's to restrict the ultimate outcome.
Right.
To meet those Department of Defense goals that also align with the land board's mission and goals. So again, any participant who is meeting those objectives can participate. And that's the goal of the notice. And I think we've hit that.
And we just touched on this, but the purchase options would require that there be a future conservation easement or similar set of deed restrictions placed on the property. And lastly, not only would the offerings be subject to the board's standard reservations, but they would ensure that lessee's 118 rights remained in effect, both the necessary time of notice, so a 1-year notice to the lessees, but also their right to match. And that, of course, is a critical and valuable lessee right. We're also seeking to have a right of first refusal granted to those primary lessees on the back end. So if you recall, essentially, we start with uneased land, we dispose of it to another party, it is then eased, and then the residual eased land is sold back either into public or private ownership. And in the event that that it went back to private ownership, we would seek a right of first refusal for the initial lessee, which may make it more achievable to ultimately be the owner of these properties than prior to them being used. Any questions on this part before I go into a timeline?
I did have one question. This is Commissioner Grove. I had one question relative to the statement. In a multi-phase takedown like Bohart, and I'm not sure if there will be others, the subsequent appraisals, the board has the right to reject it. And the language is that then the purchase option just goes away. And I'm imagining that there will be some other considerations in that. It isn't going to be a black and white thing. Because that
Correct.
seems a little problematic.
And I should clarify that would be in the event of an erroneous or problematic appraisal or something of that sort, and not just because the market has declined or something similar.
Okay.
So here's an initial timeline. Along the top, you see some certain months in 2023. And then we have a staff and board kind of action set. So in January next month, staff intends to provide the staff recommendation and seek the board's approval on a 10-year kind of umbrella board order that would authorize this general framework for the REPI properties. In March, we're expecting the finalized first phase appraisal for Bohart, and let me back up for a second. This is particular to Bohart in general. So in March, we would expect the results of the first phase appraisal. In April, we intend to come back to the board, provide the results of that appraisal to you all for your consent. We would also, at that time, seek a specific board order authorizing the purchase option offering for Bohart. And if that were approved, we would provide a notice to both the lessee and sublessee at Bohart, which are TNC as the lessee and then the Tanners as the sublessee. Following that meeting and through May, we would complete the statutory public notice and bid solicitation process. And then in June, we would return to the board with the results of that offering. If multiple qualified bids were received, then we would put those forth to the board for a determination of the winning bidder. After that, we would enter into a purchase option contract with the winning bidder with the intention of closing the first phase in or around September of 2023, which aligns with the initial expiration of the Air Force Academy's in-hand REPI funds. Are there any questions on this timeline?
Commissioner Chavez?
I just had one, this is Commissioner Chavez, one, if specifically on the Bohart, I guess, if there was a buyer that wanted to buy 100% of it outright right now, and then, obviously agree to the conservation as funds, would we accept that, or is it we're just selling piece by piece?
Both of those offers would be put forth to the board, along with the staff recommendations and the merits of either. In general, we would probably recommend all of the entire transaction to close in one phase if that were achievable. Both from a simplicity perspective, from a risk perspective, and then from a time value of money perspective.
And then over time as that, because it'd have to go to conservation easement, that's over time, or I guess they can do whatever they want. If it was a buyer, they can put it all in conservation at once and it's done, and maybe not get money from DOD. They can, I mean, there's unlimited options really.
Right.
I understand there are representatives from Trust for Public Lands and Nature Conservancy who are available.
TPL was definitely unable to make today's call. TNC and Matt Moorhead may have dialed in. He was on the road, but seeking to. Is he on by chance, Nick?
That's done.
So unfortunately, they aren't
Okay,
present right now.
so are there questions from anyone? This is not an action item, just for information.
For clear,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Pro, just for clarification at the highest level, thinking of the framework and the construct that all of these sites are different agencies are interested in them. However, the funding for any purchase in this overall transaction is from REPI. Therefore, there has to be a linear and sequential process of purchase options for the designated sites. And so I'm just clarifying that.
That's correct. I would go into a little bit more on that, which is that REPI funding is made available on a by installation basis. So there are 3 DoD interest sites that are of interest to the Air Force Academy.
Right.
Those being Bohart, Big Springs, and Edison, and those would be sequential. However, the DoD interest sites that are of interest to the other installations, for example, the lands south of Schriever, which are of interest to the Space Force, would not be in that same sequence.
Okay, so there theoretically could be parallel paths.
Correct. There could be
Going on
3.
here per installation. Okay, that
Correct.
was the key piece I wanted to understand. Okay, and are we imagining, obviously, subject to appraisals to come, et cetera, does staff anticipate multiple takedowns within purchase options for any other properties other than Bohart?
Likely for the land south of Schriever and for Table Mountain.
Okay. And for the information to be delivered in January, would staff's best estimate of how these phases might work overall be provided?
We absolutely will provide that.
Thank you.
Good questions. Any other questions? Do we have anyone online who has raised hand?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, next we have a financial update for 2022 and 23 from Nick Massey. Lots of numbers. So we're going to talk about this relates to the long-term economic value of the whole trust in the state land board. Reviewing.
Good morning, commissioners. For the record, this is Nick Massey, Assistant Director, Finance and Operations, bringing you lots of great news
Yes.
about how we did this year. This is that time of year where I do my best to bury you under a mountain of information. And normally we do it a little earlier in the season, but as travel kind of moved things around and some more pressing matters came up, we've come to you in December. So I want to point out that this is, I think, a really nice summary of how we did and where we're headed next year a little bit in preparation for the conversation that we're going to have about business plan readouts and a couple of items. But it's a nice balance to that piece of today's meeting. Whose technology is this? So the year just ended in June 30 was a pretty good year, fantastic year, best ever actually. 245 million in.
Round of applause, please.
I was a little bit remiss. I want to point out that whenever I do reporting to the board like this from the chair, I'm going to focus on the school trust really as the numbers that are most relevant. The other trusts, the other 7 trusts bring us about another $2 million a year. So just bear that in mind. There's a little bit more money out there. Even at $245 million, oil and gas, the oil and gas business continues to prove one thing, and that's I just can't tell what's going to happen with oil and gas next year. You know, in terms of setting context, I think we had forecast this year initially to be around $130 million. So please forgive the margin of error that comes with being in these businesses. So $245 million. I'm a little bit excited because I got to switch all my graphics and text to green this year, green being positive. That number was an increase over last year of 66% or about $100 million. It wasn't too long ago that our entire annual earnings were $100 million. So this was just outstanding. Again, it was a tremendous year for oil and gas. And Ecosystem Services saw the first sale of credits from a mitigation bank this year, and that was fantastic. Long investment on a thing we believe in. Grazing rents were up by more than 10%, and recreation nearly 30%. Rights of way and coal also brought us significant additional money this year, and about $6.5 million of our total was money from transactions that we chose not to reinvest within the time window. So we represented in the numbers that we show, and that flowed directly to the permanent fund. I want to take a minute to just break out a little bit of where the $245 million goes. We won't get down into the accounting ledger at all, but I'll just give you some big round numbers. So today's beneficiaries via BEST and the School Finance Act saw $135 million from us this year. Permanent Fund saw $97 million. That's, we like to think of that as the beneficiaries of tomorrow. And budget and the Investment and Development Fund used about $13 million this year. I want to say that that's pretty remarkable, pretty efficient to run a portfolio worth north of $2.5 billion and spanning 3 million acres. We do a whole heck of a lot with not very much in terms of budget. Of the $13 million, we got your approval for using $5 million of revenue on investment and development projects this year. That included the beginnings of building our carbon storage line of business, system enhancements to the Atlas system, funds set aside for what we anticipate to be transaction expenses on the Lahara disposition. Not significant, excuse me. And then I also wanted to highlight from the report that 2022 saw the completion of some investments that were helping us manage water that we own on some of our properties, and the kinds of investments that help keep the cows in line. As has been the case for many years, our budget floats between about 7 million and $8 million. Next year isn't much different. Program costs do grow slightly because of payroll and benefits. That's where we're anticipating increases in expense generally for our budget. And it's the biggest piece of our budget, of course. But most project budget line items stay pretty consistent with previous years. In some of the numbers that you saw in your packet, even when spending last year might have been less than what we had budgeted, we kind of reset to the budget number. Mentally, we're always thinking about what kind of projects can we do with that budget. And so we leave those lines alone generally from year to year. So there's not much change per program line. Some of our non-discretionary costs, such as our share of state OIT, state IT services, and our legal services, do increase pretty significantly this year, percentage-wise for sure, because the formulas that are used to sort of assess the costs that state land board will pay for those services are usually a multi-year average, and we're coming into some periods where we're catching some pretty expensive years from the past in the multi-year average. So those expenses are up a little bit. The thing I wanted to point out about budget particularly is that we don't include in our income statements the money the expenses and the revenues that come from dispositions and acquisitions, except for in the case when money that we've received in a disposition and have not reinvested within 2 years. We do show that as part of our income statement, the year that we recognize it as revenue. So there are some pretty significant transactions that happen that don't show up in those statements, but we do include a report, and we have to report our transaction behavior to the legislature. And so that's part of your packet as well. You see that money moving around and by project name. So kind of to close things out, I want to come back to the best part. For the coming year, staff is estimating school trust revenue at $227 million. Hopefully. And while that's down 7% from this record year that was fiscal year 2022, it's still tremendous earnings for our beneficiaries. Oil and gas, again, our minerals line of business is the biggest portion of our revenue every year. And so even minor changes, 6% might not raise a lot of eyebrows in some budgets, or in some forecasts, but 6% on our biggest number is a pretty big number. Recently, oil and gas prices, market prices, we've seen near record highs again. Not long ago, we were in the hundreds again for barrels of oil. And I think we're down in the 80s again. One headline can turn that entire flow of revenue on its head. And so we do our best. We come to you with a number that we feel confident in, and we appreciate some grace when the number moves a lot in 6 months. Coming through, we're halfway through our fiscal year already. So this forecast is based on a little bit more actual that we've seen year to date than normal. So I'll go back to that fingers crossed icon that we're not going to change that number much. We're anticipating some growth in revenues coming off of our renewable energy business. Again, projects continue to come online, and that is always good for generating revenue. And some additional growth in our agriculture business. Sorry, I lost myself in my notes. And some additional distribution this year from our commercial portfolio. I think I go to some length in the report, in the written report, that describes that what we represent in terms of revenue from our commercial portfolio isn't operating revenue per se. It's the distribution of our operating revenue in that portfolio to the trust. But we do expect that to grow a little bit next year compared to this year. And that's good news. So $227 million, let's celebrate it. In the next year, based on that $227 million forecast, we anticipate sending the best fund or the best program, $108 million. School finance will get their $21 million from the earnings that come off of a permanent fund. And the permanent fund itself, we anticipate seeing a deposit probably in the neighborhood of $90 million. Again, it's great to be back in this place after some lean years in my recent past. And then we had, was it 2 years ago, where all of our revenue was swept away from the permanent fund into school finance, I think. Is that right? And so, yeah, yay for the permanent fund. Let's get back to growing. And that's really what I wanted to tell you this morning. You know, it's an opportunity for me to stand up in front of everybody and say, to a person, staff loves what we do. It energizes us and we're getting really good at it. We've been really good at it. And every year is just an additional celebration for good work. So. Keep it up.
Appropriate.
Yeah.
Comments.
Josie, if I could just jump in real quick, because I'm gonna have to sign off. Nick, thanks for the report. You all are an amazing team. And it's an honor to work with you. So seeing this all come together is terrific news. And I do have to sign off. Unfortunately, I'm going to the airport. Fortunately, I'm going somewhere warm. But I really am sorry to miss all the folks we'll be recognizing today. What an amazing year. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to my colleagues and have a happy holiday and a wonderful new year. And we'll catch up in January.
Thanks so much. And wishing you the best and safe travels.
Thank you. Take care all.
And I want to second that. I was about to say the same thing. I think the board joins me in saying to this incredible staff or the leadership, how proud we are of the work you do and how competent and efficient and effective this group is. And we're really, I think, very much privileged. And I use that word carefully because I think it's really an observation that each of us have made to have such a really high performing staff that's clearly committed to the mission. So thank you so much.
Thank you, commissioners.
So Nick, I think there are a couple of questions I have, and let me just ask if I might. One is the 3% that goes to staff and perhaps Director Ryan answers. Is that what the state recommends and how do we establish that?
Well, it's not a fixed percent. It is a budget. It does go through the formal budget process, the long bill, and gets approved by the legislature every year. Having said that, it is our money. We are completely self-funded. And what the statute says is the legislature is supposed to give deference to the recommendations of the board about its expenses. I've never seen it happen that way. But there is a budget process that we go through every year that is sort of round up. How many FTEs do you have? How much legal service do you use? How many vehicles? And the budget's built by the legislature that way through the long bill.
Thank you. And then I guess the other question I have is on cash flow. Like, help me with the best distribution, for example. When does that actually hit the ground and decisions get made? And, you know, I'm interested in the public's reaction when they actually see the increase and the results of this.
So, sorry, this is Director Ryan for your record. Statute dictates our distribution formulas, and it says 50% of our revenues go to best. From an accounting perspective, we make a distribution quarterly. We can, we close our books quarterly, if you will, and make that distribution over to the treasurer's office, who then pushes it through to the Colorado Department of Education, who pushes it down to BEST. So BEST is getting quarterly distributions of our revenues. In addition, at the end of the year, statute says that the earnings on the permanent fund, the first 21 million goes to the public school, School Finance Act. Everything over 21 million goes to BEST. So that distribution typically doesn't happen until the fourth quarter. because you've got to fill the other bucket first. Nick, did I misstate any of that?
In round numbers, that's right.
Thank you. Are there other questions about that? Yes.
Commissioner Pro, I had a question about that, and then if time allows, a couple of other more specific questions, but we can get to it later, Nick, too. Wondering, with the volatility associated with our primary source of revenue, obviously the beneficiaries are aware of this as well. I'm wondering, are there ongoing dialogues about sort of with our beneficiaries about, what does a high scenario look like over 5 to 10 years? What's the declining scenario look like? How can they manage their spending plans and aspirations? What does that process look like?
In short, yes, we communicate with Andy Stein, the director of the BEST program, pretty regularly. We also give projections to some of the budget folks, legislative and governor's office. We're trying to keep them apprised of how we're looking. The other sort of governor, for lack of a better word, on what BEST does is a statutory limit on how much debt service they can pay on the bonds that they issue to build schools. So that by having a limit on the debt service of bonds, that limits how much they can issue, and they don't end up bonding against an artificial high or an artificial spike in our revenues. It creates a consistency of a revenue stream for them by having a statutory cap. When we deliver more revenues, they still go give those dollars away, but they don't bond against them. They give them away on a dollar for dollar basis rather than on a leverage basis.
Okay.
So the money is still getting into schools, but it's not being bonded against.
So when you say it's not being bonded against, in a local community, they still have to make the match. And those bonds might be from a local community on the bond.
That's correct. And so those are paid by local
Okay.
taxes. So that share of the obligation is paid by local
Right.
taxes.
Okay. Do you have other questions?
I think I'm going to hold them and maybe ask Nick. They're just a matter of interest, and I know we have a lot to go through.
Are there questions from others either online? See no questions. All right. Really excellent. Excellent. The next is the stewardship report under Mindy.
Commissioners, as Mindy joins us at the table, I want to tell you that as impressive as our is are, that's only half our mission. And the other half is stewardship. And this report makes me even more proud than the financial report. I think the way we've been able to weave stewardship into all of our lines of business, into all aspects of what we do, and really elevate taking care of the assets to be on equal footing with earning money from them is incredible. And so I just want to commend Mindy and Lindsay and frankly the entire organization, because this isn't just her, this is every line of business leader weaves this into their work. And this summary just makes me smile. Take it away, Mindy.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Mindy Gottsagen, the Conservation Services Manager for the State Land Board. And Bill just gave my first 2 slides. Thank you so much. No, it's a great introduction.
We did it in reverse.
Yeah, no, we didn't. So this is our annual report through a stewardship lens. And this also meets in some ways some of my requirements to meet and report to you once a year on the accomplishments, but also some potential changes or challenges with some of the stewardship tools we have, and to ask for feedback. So, as I present this report, I'm not asking for any action items, but I am hoping for some feedback. So if you're, make notes, ask questions, if there's anything that you see that we're missing, like in particular, and I'll have a little bit of time at the end of the presentation for just that. So these two goals, Bill mentioned that sound stewardship today is, that stewardship is part of our dual mission. Obviously, our primary mission perhaps is to generate revenue for our trust beneficiaries, but that relies on sound stewardship of all of our assets. And as Bill said, and as just what the report that Nick just presented represents the cumulative efforts of all of our staff, so does this stewardship report. And I feel like all of our staff should be up here. I also want to say that I want to call your attention to Exhibit 3 in your packet. I'm not going to be going over that exhibit at all in this presentation, but that does represent all the accomplishments of our staff and the different lines of business or business programs. I'll be focusing mostly on our stewardship tools, but I want you to be sure to look at that because I won't have time to go over all of those. I'm going to be focusing today on the last kind of our stewardship tools. And what I look at, those tools that developed over the last 45 years. And I kind of have broken this out into 4 separate categories, but this starts back in 1977, pre-Amendment 16, with the designation of our first property into the Colorado Natural Areas Program. As you know, the environmental movement in the early to mid to late 70s, Colorado first got part of that. The state land board's entrance into that was through the Natural Areas Program with the designation of the first state trust land that's designated as a natural area. But also during that time, the state land board also approved some non-development leases to protect the surface above mineral assets. And so that was another tool that developed during this period. And then for about 18 years, those are the 2 primary tools that the state land board used. Then with the advent and the passage of Amendment 16, there began about a 15-year period that I call the stewardship trust focus. The state land board designated about 295,000 acres into the stewardship trust. That action and the lawsuit that followed that actually cemented that reasonable and consistent revenue could be applied to all state trust lands and not just the maximum revenue that could be generated on any property. That the staff and the board could look at stewardship actions and consider that in their lease, in the award of their leases. Also during that time, lease stipulations for oil and gas and solid minerals began to be applied during some development leases. And then at the end of that period was actually around 2011, and the board approved its first stewardship position. I'm actually in that position still. That was the Conservation Services Manager. And so, and actually when I was hired is really to look at just the stewardship trust. But what that did, that coincided with a really new effort being made at the land board, and was really the advent of our first agency strategic plans. And from that, we began to realize we really needed more attention and a more robust stewardship program, not just for our stewardship trust properties, but for all of our state trust lands. And so just within a 4-year period, the board began to adopt and approve new kind of stewardship tools. Those would be the asset management plans for our large properties, stewardship action plans for non-contiguous properties, but is subject to have other elements in common, like wildlife habitat. And then we also approved some of our first holistic grazing management plans. And then, so this is between those 4 years and the next 6 is really kind of a 10-year program of what I consider the maturation of our stewardship program, which is also simultaneously within our administrative staff, where all staff, we began to develop agency and business plan goals that included stewardship, employee individual performance objectives, or individual performance plans, all included stewardship goals. And then we developed stewardship trust management plans. I don't know how to get that off, but best manager practices, communications and outreach, the work that Kristen does, really emphasize stewardship. And finally, we hired a stewardship trust manager just for the stewardship trust. So these stewardship tools, these are shown on this map in the order that they were adopted by the land board and and applied. And the size of these different pieces as they fit together really has to do with the amount of land that's affected, the amount of state trust land affected. The Stewardship Trust was approved in 1996. We have nearly 300,000 acres in the Stewardship Trust today. Lease stipulations began during that period. This number is 400,000 acres, shows the number of the rough number of acres that we've applied previous lease stipulations to. That includes all lands that are offered for oil and gas. As you know, even if they're leased for oil and gas, only about, I think it's 11% or 12% of those lands are developed. So not even all of these lease stipulations were ever applied. But this is the one tool that could effectively be applied to all of our state trust lands, so that even though I'm going to show you a number of the acres that have been affected by our stewardship tools, in truth, this lease stipulation would apply to any, because we now have standard line of business review and standard stipulations that are applied to most surface development leases. The next tool would be our asset management plans. The Chancellor Ranch is an example of that. That's also just over 400,000 acres. And then finally, our stewardship action plans, just under 500,000 acres are affected by these, with potentially more for stewardship action plans that are still coming. And then finally, our holistic grazing leases. This shows about 76,000 acres of lands are potentially affected by these regenerative grazing leases. And this leads to a total, again, of the leases that are affected, the properties that are affected by these tools is about 1.3 billion acres. But again, because of these stipulations, those would potentially apply to all of our surface lands. So I'm going to now go through some of these different stewardship tools. Several of these have maps showing the properties that are designated into these that are affected by these different tools. The first is the Colorado natural areas. These are the properties shown in purple. And these include 24 properties with just slightly over 32,000 acres. And they're roughly distributed throughout the state. These properties are monitored once a year by a volunteer crew. There's always one steward that's managed by the Colorado natural area, and occasionally staff joins those visits. But these are very special properties, and because we have someone visiting them every year, they can really see the changes on those properties.
Just insert here, it's an extraordinary resource of these volunteers who sometimes have to hike in a long distance just to observe these rare plants, and they are often people with really considerable expertise. And Mindy does an excellent job helping make sure that this resource serves us so well. And I must say, it's very impressive.
Thank you. I also wanted to point that Commissioner Heath sits on the Colorado Areas Natural Council. Their membership requires a seat be held by the State Land Board, and so Commissioner Heath is currently sitting in that capacity. So thank you for that. Last year, 60% of our natural areas were monitored by staff, by the Natural Areas Council volunteer teams, and staff and Commissioner Heath participated in the Natural Area Council meetings. Those happen they happen 4 times a year. The next tool is our Stewardship Trust. These are the properties shown in gold on the map. These currently represent 109 properties, varying from about a half a section or 300 acres or so, all the way up to some of our larger properties, as much as 65,000 acres. And you'll be looking at these a lot this coming year with some of the transactions we talked about earlier today. And the goals that were met in 2022, that 40 of 109 properties were monitored by staff. 100% of properties were inspected within the last 3 years. Our Stewardship Trust policy requires that these properties be visited and inspected at least once every 3 years. And that goal has been accomplished. And then the last 2 years, we focused on collaborative projects to improve wet meadow projects on Stewardship Trust properties, and also completed several archaeological and paleontological surveys. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that. Okay, our asset management plans are the properties shown here outlined in black. These are 9 large properties. These typically are over 25,000 acres, and they're evaluated by staff in each of the different business programs to identify particular goals or needs that these properties may have. These again total just over 400,000 acres. Given some of the pending property transactions or potential property transactions, several of these, the Bohart Ranch and the Lahara property could be removed from ownership. And kind of in anticipation of that, but also recognizing the needs, we're looking at developing a new asset management plan for our Badger Creek property assemblage. It's about 35,000 acres in Park and Fremont counties. And indeed, this is a photograph of that area in Southern Park County in Northern Fremont. Again, it's 35,000 acres and involves 10 separate lessees. And that is also one of our business goals for this fiscal year. Lease stipulations is another one of our stewardship tools. For oil and gas leasing, we reviewed 79 nominated tracts prior to leasing. 14 of those tracts were eliminated because of ecological concerns identified by staff or by CPW. 99% of the tracts offered contained stipulations, and staff audit found that 100% of those stipulations have been met. Okay, stewardship action plans. These are these broad, expansive areas that cross counties, may include several hundred of stewardship trust properties. So these are the properties, the aggregation of properties that we've developed stewardship action plans for. In Northwest Colorado, we have an approved stewardship action plan for greater sage grouse. In 2020, the board approved a lesser prairie chicken stewardship action plan. And we've also, you have also approved a stewardship action plan for fens. These are kind of time-saving devices for the board. Each stewardship action plan contains leasing directives. So we know exactly what will be expected of leases in these properties. They're also a time-saving device for our lessees who know what to expect for leasing our properties in these areas. These total over 1,085 surface assets. And again, because we generally have 3 layers of mineral assets, almost 3 times that amount of land in subsurface assets. And then we have additional properties that we're looking at, other additional stewardship action plans we're looking at, developed for Gunnison sage grouse, streams and wetlands, and for rare plants. Okay. And each stewardship action plan contains board-approved leasing directives and stipulations, requires mitigation for permanent impact of loss of habitat, and includes an adaptive management component. And that I present this annual report to you, showing those impacts. Those are outlined in more detail in your board packet. Also contains recommendations for change and is reapproved by the board every 5 years. And part of that is a report back to you on what is the foregone revenue for some of these impacts. This number changes every year, but I also want to show you the cumulative impacts, and some of these have been adopted. In fiscal 22, 4 oil and gas leases were foregone because of the stewardship action plans. And this is not advancing. There we go. And 9 renewable energy planning leases. And actually, these are mostly not affected by the stewardship action plans per se, but by the renewable energy leasing policy that was changed in last year, where we agreed that we would, where the board approved a policy saying that it would not lease renewable energy in areas with high forage value for, based on soils. The result of that, and using the net present value, the 30-year revenue, is that between 1.5 million and 22.4 million has been foregone. The first number represents the planning lease revenue, and the last number is really an estimate of what we think we would have gotten had those leases gone to production.
Assistant Director, I want to make a minor correction. Maybe something who's listening. the policy doesn't say we will not lease areas of high forage value. It says staff is not authorized to lease in those
Oh, got
areas. So the board can still make a decision. The board is not.
Mhm.
But I didn't want to send
Okay.
this message to them who's on the phone.
Sure. Okay. And then finally, I want to talk just briefly about regenerative grazing. This is an opportunity that could affect potentially all of our grazing leases. It may not be appropriate, or certain configurations with private land may not allow this to happen, but generally this involves two components. One is changing in the timing, duration, and intensity of grazing on a property, and also providing sufficient rest and recovery periods. And we've seen, this is a picture of the Lowry Ranch. This picture was taken in early October after a significant drought on the property, but you can still see the amount of forage that was there. A large pasture like this may only be grazed for days and then given a long period of recovery. And we also provide stewardship projects through a variety of funds that the state land board provides. In fiscal year 2022, nearly $1.5 million was spent on about 78 projects. The bulk of this was through the Investment and Development Fund. Now, this is somewhat of a estimate in that we don't tease out the stewardship components of every IND application or project, but generally speaking, many of these projects went towards stewardship improvements on particular properties, largely through infrastructure that would facilitate those stewardship goals. Other significant funds were the Enhancement Fund, which is used to fund improvements on properties in the public access program, invasive weeds and pests, ecosystem services, our stewardship account, and finally, land and water funds. And more detail as that is provided in your packet. And then finally, in fiscal year 22, staff performed over 1,600 inspections on leases or surface uses. And this is a variety from field operations, recreation, stewardship trust, oil and gas. It's just a combination of all of those. I will say most of those involve well pads. Those are certainly quicker kind of inspections than walking a site and taking the time to do a biological evaluation. And then finally, I just wanted to take a few minutes to highlight a couple of projects. In the past, I've kind of cherry-picked a couple of projects. This year, what I wanted to do was focus on our cultural and our archaeological and paleontological projects, because we've really done a lot of work in that this past year. The first of these involves the Chancellor Ranch. I think you've all been to the Chancellor Ranch. This photo shows a kind of a rock shelter. This rock here in the middle is about 4 feet tall, and this rock panel in the back with artwork on it is probably about 7 to 8 feet tall, so you can get a size for that. And just beyond this is another large kind of donut-shaped rock structure that was habited for many, many, many years. But this is these sites were documented and reported to the State Historical Preservation Office. It was the first of 2-year survey. This was the first time that this kind of scientific study was done on the Chancellor Ranch, and we expect that many more will be done. Wilson Mesa, property that we discussed earlier today, prior to its proposed sale, we had a Class 3 archaeological survey done on the property. No significant sites were found, and so we feel comfortable that any resources that are there will be, not lost not lost to protection. McElmo Creek is the Phil's World property that you all visited last fall. Again, the staff applied for and received its first state historical fund grant that the land board was actually the applicant for, and they're in the process of completing a Class 3 survey there. And then the last 2 projects involve paleontological studies. One was on Chalk Bluffs. This was a natural areas program. Their staff or volunteer identified a fossilized jaw. We had a paleontological company go out there. They found the rest of an entire skeleton of a prehistoric horse and have excavated that, and we're waiting to see how that will be curated, but it's been taken off the site. And also on that property, they found a fossilized giant tortoise. And then finally, back at the Chancellor Ranch, as part of the survey that we've done and part of the goals of the asset management plan is to do a paleontological survey. And they found fossilized footprints of a large dinosaur from the Jurassic era. And then finally, I just wanted to end with our priorities for this coming year, the year that we're in now. Lindsay will be working on the stewardship trust replacement properties for the properties that are in the proposed REPI transaction. We'll be bringing the rare plant stewardship action plan to the board, completing the Badger Creek area plan, advancing additional wet meadow restoration projects, and continuing cultural resource surveys. And with that, I just have any questions and discussion, any questions about the existing tools, any opportunities that you would like staff to pursue, and any additional information that you'd like me to include in next year's report.
So, are there questions from the commissioners? Yes, Mr. Tuck.
A question and a comment. Thank you. The comment is, having been a casual observer to State Land Board back in the formative days, the early days of the Stewardship Trust, I'm trying to remember the years, maybe 2009 and 10.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing this report, the difference in the strategy, the outcome, the reporting is just monumental. I just salute the entire State Land Board, all the commissioners that helped it, and Mindy for running this. I mean, it's just obviously at the natural resource seat, makes my heart warm, but just the well-balanced approach, the integrated approach, the holistic approach you've taken to these programs, strategies, tools, and outcomes is just remarkable. Thank you.
Thanks.
My specific question relating to another passion, regenerative grazing. I'm curious, do all leases as they come up, are regenerative grazing options or provisions incorporated? If so, generally, what do those look like? And finally, how are they incented? And what do you see as the uptake across the general community with all the education and the examples that the state has?
Great question. We've kind of taken a carrot approach. And so we've been offering annual lessee forums where we bring in speakers, well-respected members of the, not just grazing community in Colorado, but, you know, to bring in and talk about the benefits of regenerative grazing and how to apply some of these on individual leases. We've also targeted mostly larger ranches where this can be done a little more easily. We've also brought in, we've tried to promote Lowry Ranch, where is really one of our stellar examples of what Nick Trainer has done, and use that as an educational opportunity. You know, we funded the new ranch headquarters out there, you know, to have that. And then Nick does several of those a year as well. We also have an annual forum in the summer. Unfortunately, COVID has put a dent in that the last couple of years. So we've strategized among staff what's the best way to reach out to our kind of more traditional lessons. So I guess that's still a work in progress.
Commissioner Crowe, it's a great result. As you asked the question, it struck me it would take, it needs about a half hour or 45 minutes of focused discussion. And we could
We do that some meeting.
do workshops or
Separately.
Our field ops folks involved in the answer because
It's hard to do where we're in holding to somebody else's larger private
Right.
stuff. And so
Yeah.
forcing a plan that they may or may not wish to adopt or different practices than they've historically used is tricky.
Mhm.
But where we've got control,
Yeah.
we're for sure implementing that.
I'd be curious, perhaps at one of the field ops meetings, if there might be a 20-minute discussion that I could listen in on and just, we could talk about it.
And I think we could bring it back and go aboard a little bit by a deeper discussion of what we're doing in that area and what we're.
Better to see it.
That's right. And that too,
Yeah.
yeah. And some of the technologies out there are just really advancing that facilitate and enable a cost-effective.
So I would like to comment, sort of building on Director Ryan's comments. This is a source of such pride that the land board is involved with this, and a lot of credit goes to Mindy and Lindsay and to other folks with whom we work. And it's been my observation that not only is that felt within the land board realm, but outside, the credibility of the stewardship work is really, I think, highly respected outside of our agency, and that really makes me feel very proud. And finally, it's a little bit like a family as I look out at staff. Sometimes within your own family, you don't always know all the wonderful things that are happening. And I'm guessing that this year-end report, I'm sure many of you know this, but it sort of illustrates the good work that's happening within the land board, and it's got to make you all feel proud as we do. And finally, I guess, Kristen, you know, I think the general public deserves to also know not only this good work here, but also the work that I think was done earlier in determining that when we put in place alternative energy on the solar leasing, how much work we did to avoid those high quality land pieces. Because as people are looking at this question, more and more, I think the public's aware now that there's real conflict in terms of this. So, and with oil and gas, the fact that we've turned down some of those and there have been stipulations on others, I think these are the questions that people really have. And you provided good, hard evidence of how we're trying to balance this. So I think building on what you said at the outset, this really makes us proud of the good work we're doing.
Well, thank you. I just want to just include all the staff in that. I'm the one that gets to sit here and show some pretty pictures, but everybody's involved, and it's a
And I
real.
didn't mean you didn't know, but I just think sometimes, you know, when you see the actual presentation, it makes you realize how much good work's happening.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your support for all the work we've done too.
And so let me just ask, I know we have a tight time frame. We usually do a break midpoint. Can folks just take some time, and we'll try to be back in about 10 minutes? Is that gonna work? 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's the amount of time we allocate for lunch, but you know. It's so fun to look up there and see all of you under these lights. It's just great to have all of the folks from the field and elsewhere in today. Just really pleased to have you with us. All right, let's.
This is my rate.
All set? Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. Greg Okish, Assistant Director. I think this is the last piece of our annual reporting, and it's a look back at the progress we've made in advancing our 9 sort of identified business programs. It's maybe the most granular look at the data. There, we don't have any slides, so you can refer to the readouts that were in your package. The order, and I'm going to be very brief. I think if there's a spot where we can make up time in the agenda today, this is it. So,
Don't ask questions.
no, you can ask questions, but I'm going to ask the presenters to be efficient. We're going to do this in alphabetical order, more or less, so that you're all ready. It'll be ecosystem services first, then field operations, oil and gas, and then I'd like Chris and David to come up together to do real estate, renewable energy, and tower sites as sort of a package. And then we'll do recreation, solid minerals, and then we'll do water last. So with that, they'll each have some very brief comments, and then please ask questions if you.
We can ask them.
Morning, Commissioners. I'm Mindy Gottsagen, the Conservation Services Manager for the State Land Board. This is my other hat. So, do you have any, well, I was just going to say the three main things I wanted to report to you on. It obviously is our wonderful new revenue that we got through the Ecosystem Services Program with the bulk sale of a large number of Pebbles Meadow Jumping Mouse credits for a reservoir project in Larimer County. The second one is that the Corps also approved in fiscal year 22 our first wetland and stream mitigation bank. And then finally, staff approved our first carbon sequestration forest carbon lease in fiscal year 22. So we made kind of some new firsts in each of those areas. And I'll add another one that the statement that staff is also engaged with a company right now to look at how we can take our ecosystem services program to kind of the next level and take advantage of emerging opportunities. Are there any questions that you might have?
Are there questions from the board?
Sorry, I do have one.
Okay.
Mindy, I was curious what this meant. The historic use of the non-compete clause in leases may have unintentionally limited the number of mitigation bank projects.
Right.
Staff, the compete relative.
We have with our ecosystem services lessees offered them a non-compete that we will not compete against that bank, against them by putting another state land board bank in that same watershed.
Got it, okay. Got it.
So
Those.
We talked
Okay.
about in your report competing mitigation banks. Can you say more about that?
I didn't hear the whole question.
Competing mitigation banks.
Oh, competing.
Mitigation banks.
Right. So when a mitigation bank, it basically generates money by selling credits. So either wetland credits or species credits. And they often have a service area where they sell credits for. So they wouldn't sell them statewide. They'd only sell them to impacts in that general area. The more banks that are located in that service area, the more competition they have for the sale of those credits. So ideally, if you have a mitigation bank, you want very few, if any, competing mitigation banks in that area. And
So I guess when you say competing with.
oh, they're competing with other credit buyers. So if someone in a company has created an impact, for example, to Pebbles Meadow Jumping Mouse habitat, and they need to buy credits to offset that impact. If there's two banks in there and those two banks are competing for the sale of that one, they're competing for that sale, they will have to bring their price down because of the rules of supply and demand. Yeah.
Have you noticed that where prices have gone down?
Well, we are beginning to see that in wetland banks. And so there is this general rush to market. You want to be the first bank in that area, then you don't have any competition. You're more or less control the market. As more banks are coming in, and that's what we're seeing in Colorado, there is the prices are beginning to lower. Yeah, or to come down.
Any other questions?
We get field ops.
Good morning, Commissioners. William Winston, Field Operations Team Leader. Happy to report a strong year this year. And just the highlights that I'd like to bring forward are we established and created our first business plan for field ops this year. Provides a background and gives us context to look at and look back into going forward. And also provides us a roadmap for opportunities so that we do retain our focus going forward. It'll be a good resource that we use a lot through the year, I think, to maintain those focuses. The other thing I'm really excited about, and Commissioner Frobe, a little bit to your earlier question, we completed and initiated a more effective competitive bid form this year so that when we have competitive bids, we have that opportunity. We always look at revenue, stewardship, and community, but our new form puts more emphasis on stewardship and community and provides us the opportunity to create more focus there in our bidding process. So that's something I'm excited about, and it's worked well so far. And the last thing I'd like to mention, we were successful in acquiring the Bear Creek Ranch, which will be our first annual lease that we're able to initiate and work on. And we're excited to do that in the coming spring. So that's going to be a fun opportunity to see what we can do with grazing management in working with a lease in a different way.
Was that a competitive bid?
It will be. It'll be a
the
light
first one?
competitive bid. Yeah. But it'll be a competitive annual bid process. And just a quick shout out to a great field staff that made this possible to bring forward to you. So thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So, Terry,
Are there questions?
questions, please.
Any questions?
I just briefly, or do you think the lease rates will rise moving forward? Or I know it's kind of a few things.
In general.
In general.
On our competitives, I continue to think we must be reaching a plateau. We probably are reaching a plateau. They did maintain strength this year. I don't think they rose really, but they certainly maintained strength.
What was the highest competitive?
Well, the highest competitive bid we had this year, which was an outlier, was $100 in AUM, which, was, there were other factors that they were bidding on. We had them as high as 60. That would have been more generally a bid on the grass. So, but 25 to 30, 35 is, in our competitive bids is fairly, we see that fairly often. So, I think that's likely to probably continue. I think it'd be more healthy if it continues rather than keeps rising, honestly. So.
I had a question about the interstate water compacts and the draw of our wells and just kind of where that is and what you foresee for the future.
So the draw,
Can we hold that for Justin?
probably, yeah. That'd be-
William doesn't know him.
But the big issue,
Risk to the program.
but the big issue in the Arkansas Valley is the undecreed stockholding ponds or the water ponds that had to be torn out.
Yeah, and again, I'm probably not the best one to deal with that, but I would say this is an issue going forward as far as the drought. We are seeing that affecting our wells, our water wells in some areas. So it's a concern for sure.
I just want to acknowledge that William was the winner last year of the outstanding award, and you continue to do excellent work. So congratulations for last year's acknowledgement.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Crystal Coranda, Minerals Director. And the highlight for the year was it was our highest revenue year of record, and we doubled our gas royalties. And another thing that I wanted to point out, I thought was pretty unique from this year was there was a court case that staff had been following that dealt with the definition of production, and it would drastically change how we interpret our leases. And I really appreciated the AG's office. Corey called me and said, "Do you want to file an amicus brief on this?" And I was like, "Tell me more." And Corey and Aaron and Ed worked very hard on that, and they even got a shout out from the Supreme Court about how good the brief was. And so I think they really put our case out there, and hopefully that impacts the decision that they're going to make, and it goes in our favor. So those are some of the highlights from this year. Do you have any questions? Wonderful.
One short.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, Commissioner Crowe. What's generally the process for updating the business plan in terms of engagement with external parties or other stakeholders?
Well, we used to have a kind of a process with COGA that we would, send them different changes that we've been doing. For instance, they sent a letter today that I just sent you guys. So we would probably engage with Koga, but other outside parties, I'm not sure if there's much of a mix.
I would say that in general with business plans, we'll scan the horizon for trends, changes in upcoming policy, those kinds of things as much as we can, just from professional relationships and the internet. I think if we sometimes use professional consultants, so when Chris is going to ask you for someone later today to hire one of them. So that's probably the way we've done it in the past. We're open to suggestions if you get some thoughts.
Okay, okay. I was thinking if we were sharing it with outside parties, you're saying input. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure you were asking about that in relation to business, plans, right?
Yes.
The business plan
Versus
to be
our
updated.
policies and procedures.
Right.
As we do more direct engagement with industry associations with our policies, when we're changing lease contract terms, those
Right.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
We do go to Koga and Calhoun's and engage more directly. The business plan is sort of a different level of document.
Right. It was more the input for the business
Got
plan
it.
specifically, because I know with like the lease language, or not the policy language. there
Yes.
you come out.
Well, we
Yeah.
have five, incidentally, sort of, we have 5 business plans, I think that are being updated in the next 6 months, so there will be a lot of that work going on.
And I'm open to help.
What are the projections for, based on what one knows now about oil and gas in the long term?
Oh, my.
I mean, I know that's very dependent on many conditions, but what do you work with in terms of general sense of?
I mean, we've been hearing that things are going to decline in Colorado, especially because our regulations are so strict. But what we've been seeing is the nominations are still coming in, the drilling activities are happening. And in a lot of other places in the country where they're starting to tighten down those regulations, we've already been a leader. Our people here know how to drill and operate under those regulations. So I feel like a lot of people are looking to us as a model of how to drill. And so we haven't seen it slowing down, and I think it's going to continue for a little while, at least.
I build on that answer a little bit. From the in the near term, there are now 18 active rigs in Colorado, which is the highest it's been in years and years. And I think that reflects two things. One is that the price has stayed up. And two is that the large operators are developing a comfort level with the area plan process that OGCC is now pivoted toward. And so OGCC would tell you they just approved their third comprehensive area plan last week. That could allow up to 800 wells within that planned area. And it's, I think, bringing in the well-capitalized big super majors and harming the little guys, little operators. So that's sort of near term. While prices are up, people are drilling here and they are getting more comfort around the process. Longer term, Nick and I talk about this regularly, that there's clearly a plan both nationally and in Colorado to reduce reliance on carbon. And we've got to continue to try and find other lines of business that can enable us to throw off this level of revenue to fund schools. It's going to need to be an all of the above strategy. There's no silver bullet out there. Crystal's working hard on carbon storage. We've talked about finding ways to increase the productivity of the permanent fund. Lots of the businesses you're hearing from continue to make incremental improvements. But I think long-term, we see this declining over 20 years. Of course, every time I predict it, as Nick said, the price goes up for reasons that we didn't count on.
It's very. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for this.
Chris and David.
Morning, Commissioners. I'm Christopher Smith, the Real Estate Section Manager, and I have with me David Rodenberg. And we have about 45 minutes of content here, so if you want to get a cup of coffee, just trying to give Bill and Greg We're going to cover 3 business plans sequentially here. I'll start with the real estate and then I'll hand it over to David to cover renewable energy and tower sites. So 2 things I want to draw to your attention in the real estate business plan. The first is one that William mentioned part of, which is the acquisition of the Bear Creek Ranch in Huerfano County. We concluded that acquisition about a month ago. And it's just a beautiful ranch. And then the other is that we have been working on a disposition that the board approved back in May of selling 400 acres in Weld County to a housing developer. That's still under contract and still moving forward. The second thing I'd like to draw to your attention is on the sort of front page on the left, the big negative 1.2%. This is, we're seeing a change in commercial real estate, as I think anyone could have imagined. Things are changing there, and we've tried to highlight those on the second page under lessons learned in the risks to the program. We can see that there's a long-term impact from non-traditional workers, from traditional working in an office to working from home, and that is certainly impacting commercial real estate. Looking towards the future, we are expecting vacancy rates to rise. We're also expecting operating expenses to rise with inflation as well. And so both of those are sort of cutting into our bottom line. And it's happening with all of the commercial real estate landlords around. As a result, me and Matt and Julie have been reviewing our commercial real estate portfolio, which we will come to you and we're going to tour it in early spring of this year to talk about what we should be doing going forward. But we are, while we're keeping our eye on that market, we're not actively pursuing acquiring large commercial assets that are sort of gross rent office. We have been looking at triple net assets and ranches and things like that. So that's what I have on real estate. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes.
What is our vacancy rate right now?
Our vacancy rate currently is 20%.
About 500,000 feet.
That's correct. I would also note that our revenue went down this year because we sold the King Carroll Business Center, which was a 50,000 square foot building. So we dropped our square footage by about 10% overall. But yes, we're at about, we're currently at 472,000 square feet and 80% occupancy. Commissioner, did you?
No, I had no questions. Other members of the board have questions?
And I'll pass it over to David to talk about renewable energy.
Good morning, Commissioners. David Rodenberg with the real estate section, right-of-way manager, cell tower site leasing manager, and renewable energy leasing manager. I just wanted to bring a couple highlights to the renewable energy program. The biggest one, like Chris mentioned, the negative 18% for renewable energy. Although that was due to expiration of several key planning leases and one-time non-recurring production lease payments that was included in the goal when it should not have been. So there was sort of a mistake in that forecast, if you will. But with that said, I fully expect that the program revenues will bounce back and we'll meet our fiscal goal year this year of 3.5 million. And I have that level of confidence based on the planning leases that we've already signed and the coming leases over the next few months that we expect to sign, as well as the online of the production Thunderwolf production lease, which will generate around 800,000 plus of revenue for the state land board. So those key points, I really fully expect the program to bounce back next year. The other highlight I wanted to bring up is Mindy kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but regarding the board's goal of protecting high value forage agricultural lands. We feel like that's been pretty successful via our change in policy where we look at forage value, and we've deterred development on about 11,000 acres due to the forage value. And this equated to about 9 planning leases that we ultimately did not bring to the board because we felt that it was best to keep that agricultural grazing land intact. That's all I have as far as highlights. If you have any questions, I'd be.
And I'd like to actually add one more. Excel Energy 2 weeks ago put out an RFP to purchase 4,000 megawatts of renewable energy in the next 7 years. To give you an idea, that would power about 1.5 to 2 million homes, which would be all the homes in Colorado, but it's used for businesses and everything. If history holds, we will probably be about 10% of that. We're currently at about 250 megawatts today. Thunderwolf will bring online another 200 of solar and 100 of battery. That is under construction. We were out there a month ago and we plan to take the board out for the ribbon cutting in June. And so that'll get us to 500. We expect to, double that at least double that just with this one RFP over the next 7 years, if history holds with just our ownership pattern. So.
Any comments? We're disappointed you didn't use your full 45 minutes.
Well, we still have one more business item. Tower sites could take.
Yeah, a couple key points with tower sites. I just wanted to point out that the staff did exceed our revenue goal with additional leases and a few additional leases, even with the limited amount of FTE that we put forth to that program. However, with that said, staff is working on a deeper look at the program to explore the potential growth and to see if more FTE or consultant time might net more revenue if we dedicate more time to that. So we're kind of doing a deeper dive with that this year to look into that.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Morning, commissioners. Just want to alert you to the rare sighting of the tie on a recreation person. This doesn't happen very often, so must be a special occasion. Just a report on the recreation program this morning. Just a couple of items. I think you'll notice the number on the up for growth from the program is almost about 28% from last year, which is quite substantial. That's a big growth. And we've had pretty consistent growth in the program year to year over the last 5 years. A couple of just key items that I wanted to point out on it. Hunting leases and high quality big game units have consistently produced pretty reasonable revenue in a lot of cases, or in some cases exceeded lease revenues that have been generated from grazing, which is just important. It's just is information. We're seeing good value out of some properties in well-located locations. And I think that plays well with some of the ranches that we have in our portfolio and some that we have looked to acquire as well. With the other item that I wanted to point out was just about 7 years ago, we implemented rec auctions on our properties, allowing anybody to bid or submit an application for a recreation lease, and gone through the auction process through policy. And that's been a very good tool for us. It's allowed us to, one, achieve better revenue on really key properties. And it's also allowed us to get a better insight into what the recreation market, what the prices are in the recreation market. So some good information that's come out of that process. And finally, the last thing I just wanted to point out, under the Risks 2 program, I've had it in there for a number of years, but just the misperception among the general public that trust lands are open to the public, like BLM and U.S. Forest Service lands. That's a continual struggle. It is something that we work pretty hard at as staff, and also working a lot with Kristen and outreach to the organizations just to make sure that they understand kind of what our unique business structure and how our properties fit into state-owned lands, and particularly trust lands, and how they fit into general public use. Any questions with the business plan?
So I had a question. As you look at diversifying your land beyond hunting, what kinds of activities do you find are being requested in terms of use?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I know there's some weddings and events that are obvious. You see trends that.
Yes, I think we're seeing a lot more interest kind of from the commercial more developed type uses. We definitely have had some interest in some of our properties around campgrounds, commercially run campgrounds. We also have some other, we've had interest from developed bike parks, and trying to think what else.
I would say, I'm not sure it's a different use, but you mentioned hunting. Hunting's a big part of what we do with the outfitters who are paying sort of a premium. I think you talk about Northmont Ranches as an example.
Yes, that's a good point. North Mountain Ranches, that lease is a year-round recreation lease on about 10,000 acres, 200 acres. In addition to the outfitted hunting that operates on that property, they're looking at ways to expanding for more year-round use, hosts on that property, weddings, corporate retreats, and private family type rental for the facility. We see a lot more kind of within recreation, a lot more rounding out of the types of uses in addition to just the hunting revenue. So yeah, that's a good example.
The other question, I hope this is not naive, but when we have hunting leases, I mean, how long does that work for a certain property? It seemed to me like after a while, you can only hunt so much, there are wildlife figures out there. Could be in that area.
That is true. I think the majority of our hunting leases are a lot of our lessees on the outfitter side. It's their business. They're looking to make sure that they maintain a reasonable amount of wildlife and opportunity on there to continue to run their business, so that we happen to be pretty fortunate to have good lessees on the outfitter side. And on the hunting side, I mean, I know a lot of hunters who are very much conservationists from the standpoint that they want to make sure that their resource that they're interested in continues to be on the property. So
Well, statewide, CPW manages herd size and animal resources based on how many licenses they issue. So really, there's at a top level, CPW is looking after managing the health of all of the large game and herds in Colorado. So it trickles, in a sense, it starts there, and trickles down.
I'd say on a lot of our properties, we are pretty cognizant of the intensity of use that they propose. North Mountain Ranches, again, I'll come back to that one. We, through the proposal that we got from the existing operator on that property, we have a pretty good idea as to what their amount of hunts will be on that property, and just trying to make sure that that's a sustainable level so that it doesn't impact the long-term wildlife population on there.
You mentioned outfitters that are looking for other lines of business. How does that impact us? Do we charge more if they're going to have a wedding out there? Do we get a cut of that, or how does?
Yeah, so good question as well. On a property like North Mountain Ranches, where we advertise it for more year-round type use, not just the what do they call it, the hunting use on the property, they will build that into their bids for the property, and will pay a much higher premium. That property itself, just comparing it, the outfitting side or the recreation side on that property is about $225,000 a year, versus the agricultural side of it or the grazing side of it is about $30,000 a year. So it's the same operator on it, but they're factoring that into their bids and paying a much higher premium as a result.
I think you were going to continue. I thought you were going to continue. So he's right. That lease was offered with, you have the right to do all of these things at one price. But on a property like Lowry, Abe has been able to sort of do it all the cart. And so these special events at a standalone one-off price when somebody wants to use that property.
Yes, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Ben Teschner, Solid Minerals Manager. Before I get into my numbers and things like that, I want to give a shout out to Mindy, because not only for the fantastic stewardship work she's doing for the agency as a whole here, but specifically for all of us line of business managers, when we send out our line of business comments, we get a lot of really important information from Mindy, and especially when in my line of business, when I'm, considering projects that potentially have some substantial impacts to our properties, that work that she's putting in, that's really kind of this behind the scenes work, is really, really important. So thank you, Mindy. Second, I guess to move on to my numbers here. I want to point out two kind of big things here. The first is that the top line number you see on the left is the solid minerals for non-coal. And that number is, I think, at some point in the past, before I got here, we decided to report that as the top line number because we saw coal as a declining asset from a revenue perspective, which is certainly in general true. That said, there's almost twice that much in addition from coal revenue. And coal revenue remains something that's very important to the business line, and managing those leases as they decline. And we think about the next use of those properties as a big part of my job. From the non-coal perspective, we're looking at primarily construction materials, sand, gravel, crushed stone, limestone from cement, things like that. And that remains the bread and butter of this business line. And the increase in revenues in that space are generally from gradual additional leasing as we see continued growth in the state and demand for these construction materials, and the increasing our royalty rates on existing leases as is permitted to us in those lease agreements. So second, or I guess we're on third, maybe. This business line has also become not just mining and solid minerals, but also sort of all of the mineral and things that smell like geology that aren't oil and gas. And the really exciting thing that's coming kind of along here is this geologic carbon storage leasing. And so for the commissioners and perhaps the general public who may not be familiar with this is the idea that we're going to take carbon emissions that would be emitted into the atmosphere, and rather than do that with them, we're going to inject them underground where they are not causing climate impacts down there. And so we issued our first exploration lease for geologic carbon storage this year. And we're seeing that is that business line is in its nascent stages, but appears to be growing very, very quickly. So expect to see some exciting stuff coming from us on geologic carbon storage. And we would anticipate that we're going to be bringing a carbon storage lease to you within the next 6 months, certainly. So
if I could add one thing, add some color to what Ben said. He's correct. We made an intentional decision not to report out on coal revenue, not because it was declining per se, but because that's not the needle. We want the program manager to move. We want the program manager to move the needle on all the other stuff. So it's not, he's correct, it's not insignificant, and it does still require careful attention to make sure it's optimized through its useful life. And moving forward, we want to see the increases in all the other sort of opportunities he's described.
I'd just make the observation that as we think about the new legislative session, I think a lot of the composition of new and continuing legislative boards are interested in these kinds of alternatives. And the more we can report the sort of entrepreneurial work we're doing about this, I think it's really good for folks to know that and to recognize that we're kind of ahead of the game in terms of anticipating this transition. So good.
Thank you.
Good work.
Anything else?
Yeah, and I thought one of the things you might highlight on risks to the program was the special interest groups that have really become more and more local. These things are really hard to permit.
Yes.
And it gets permits at the local level and at state level, and we've had a few proposals that would have generated significant revenue for us that were unable to get local permits. And I think that is also a continuing growing risk
Absolutely.
to the program that we've got to deal with.
Yeah, particularly with, I would say particularly with large quarries, is where we're seeing, I think, the most of that, that risk. But it's I don't know if it's a flip side, but another piece of that is that the existing mines that are already permitted have a substantially higher value because it's so difficult to get another one. And so we're seeing, rather than the sort of industry trend in certainly the sand, gravel, crushed stone, limestone space, is to amend and expand existing operations rather than try to go get new ones. And, whenever that's possible. So, because that's an easier permitting lift generally than permitting a brand new operation. So.
One question regarding coal, since it's been brought up a couple of times. Do you think there'll be extensions on not closing them because of the strain and the cost of power?
Yeah, that's really hard to say. And I frankly have no idea. I know that our coal operators, we basically have two operators who are producing coal in substantial amounts from our lease area right now. It's the Trapper Mine and the 20 Mile mines in Moffett and Routt counties respectively. And those two operators I know have told me they are exploring markets that are not the Hayden and Craig Station power plants, which are their current markets. It remains to be seen whether they will find those markets or not. Anything else?
Other questions? If not, then thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. So.
Good morning, commissioners.
Welcome.
I'm Justin Bieri. I'm the water program manager. I'm also become affectionately known as Justin H2O. So
We had Justin Osborne, so Justin O was taken.
Yeah.
right. So anyway, just wanted to point out a couple things. One is we got the water position and I'm here. So we take the program and run with it. I like to say to squeeze the sponge. So that was a big achievement by people other than me to bring myself here. But the other thing I'd like to point out is one of the goals is to confirm the water assets that the land board currently holds. So in understanding what we hold forms the basis of everything else I do. And so just getting familiar within the last 3 months of being here is going to be an ongoing process for sure. So that being said, I'm taking questions that I can attempt to answer. So.
And there was a question earlier. Did you get a question earlier about interstate compacts?
Yeah, sure. I can talk.
Maybe Commissioner Johnson.
Just on the Colorado River again.
Yeah, the Colorado River is a unique beast that I'm less familiar with, and the land board doesn't have a whole lot of assets involved. Maybe not any actually.
I think it's just wells that might be on property there.
Right. Yeah, and so the main areas that are under duress, I guess, would be the Republican River Basin out in eastern Colorado. That compact with Kansas and Nebraska is heavily scrutinized through Kansas. And so there's different opportunities out there that we have some farms that we need to maybe take some action on. Down in the San Luis Valley on the Rio Grande River is in a similar situation. And then finally the South Platte River and the compact with Nebraska, and Nebraska saying we want our allocation has got implications for that lower portion of the river. And so
So what's happening with that with Nebraska? It was big media item several months ago.
Sure. Well, from what I understand, Nebraska is actively pursuing some of the land out in the Julesburg area to start construction on their canal. We can go into a much deeper dive of how this all came about. But the short version is they're entitled to their compact and they haven't been accessing it in the winter months, and that they want to, and so they're going to. So I don't know all the details of the political play that's going on, but that's the short version.
And I guess the other is about the northern permits that have just been approved. Will that have impact on any of the state land?
For Northern Water? Yeah, I think so. There's a reservoir that is in the midst of permitting or something along those lines that I think is it a section that we're talking with Northern about?
There's a little more. There's a couple sections of state trust land that will be affected by the reservoir, and we've been in discussions with Northern Water off and on for almost 10, not quite 10, couple of years. So those will be resurrected at some point when they come forward with the need to acquire those properties, and we'll bring it to you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Planning a water workshop for later this year.
Great.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Right, well. Very well done. Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is the improving practices and procedures associated with capturing, retaining, and sharing institutional knowledge. And we will talk to Steph.
You all read it. The only thing I want to call your attention to is congratulate Chris for years of perseverance. After 146 years, Chris has successfully the rest of it will be in the next few months, but the fact that we got some patents signed and some land transferred over to us last month was a pretty big deal. So congratulations. Later in the spring, we hope to congratulate him for the rest of the transaction. Did anyone have any other questions on our staff report? Good.
Right. Moving forward, with no requests for review, so the next item is a policy review on Orleans development.
Good morning, Commissioners. Crystal Coranda. I will be going through the oil and gas development policy review with you. This policy has to be updated every 3 years, and it was last updated in 2019. My clicker is not working. Oh, there we go. Oh, nope. There we go. So when I was looking at the current policy, I was really trying to focus on what was the board's intent when creating this original policy, what are our current practices in place, and what are some good suggestions to make sure that this is all cohesive and aligned. And those are kind of where our suggestions and recommendations came from, just to make everything cohesive, aligned. I'm going to go through some of the major things I've highlighted. There's some other minor changes that you might see, but I didn't think they were material. So if there's anything that you want to go over with me, please stop and let me know. So the first thing that I want to point out is under this best management practices. The kind of intent behind this was really around stipulations that are on our oil and gas leases. So part A is stipulations will be monitored and enforced by staff. And then part B is the part that I'd like to point out right now that we're looking to try and change. So this is the current language. At the time of oil and gas drilling, staff will monitor lessee consultation with groups identified above. So staff pointed out two different things we'd like to change. One, here you can see oil and gas drilling at the time of oil and gas drilling. We're actually out there meeting with lessees well before any sort of drilling operations occur. We're meeting with them at the staking, which is when they go out and put stakes in the ground to figure out where the pad will be. So we wanted to change that language to reflect when we're actually going out there and meeting with them, which is well before. And then second, the language currently reads that staff will monitor lessee consultations with outside third parties. And I don't think that that was the original intent. I don't think the board is wanting us to go monitor the lessees meetings with CPW or meetings with these other parties. I think what they wanted, and from looking back at what the discussions were, they wanted us to meet with lessees with these stipulations, make sure they understood the stipulations and that they would be put in place before they did any drilling operations. So I think that was the original intent. And so staff is recommending the language be changed to what I have here. Prior to COGCC permitting, staff will review comments from the groups identified above and all associated lease stipulations. So that will be at the staking. That's when Steve and our staff goes out, make sure they understand their steps and are going to enforce, are going to put them in place. So does anyone have any questions about that one? No? So the next part, staff is requesting to sort of combine these two, again, based off original intent. I think the intent was here for staff to monitor and enforce these stipulations and then report out to the board on an annual basis if there are any enforcement actions. The way Part C is written right now is when it says stipulation monitoring and enforcement will be reported annually. It almost looks like we're supposed to do a monitoring report annually. And I don't think that that was the intent. Staff doesn't think that that be a good use of staff resources to do an annual monitoring report. And so we're just looking to combine these two. So it will say staff will monitor and enforce stipulations and will report out any enforcement actions to the board annually. Okay. So the next thing that we highlighted currently in the policy, it says leases are held by production. And staff is looking to add the words actual and in paying quantities. So actual production is in regard to the litigation that's out there that's saying that the definition of production may not actually mean bringing hydrocarbons out of the ground and marketing them. There's some question that maybe it just means discovering hydrocarbons capable of producing in paying quantities. So we want to make sure we put actual in, and then in paying quantities just aligns with our oil and gas lease. Currently, our lease says that they have to produce in paying quantities, and we're going to also throw in definitions. And here's the definitions of actual production and paying quantities. And then we're going to make sure that our oil and gas lease also reflects this. So we'll update our oil and gas lease to make sure that they're all cohesive and aligned.
And is that in line with the case that we brought?
Yeah.
It's in line with what's our desired outcome from the case. And will be, if the desired outcome is not achieved in the litigation, our contractual arrangements will align with what we want.
I'm just trying to beef up and have as much out there of what we would like it to mean. Yeah.
Will you be modifying leases that haven't expired or taking those to the?
No, ones that are currently in place, we can't modify, but a lot of our post 2011 leases have a provision that say that they have to be in line with our policies. And so I think we have an argument there that when we're updating the policy, it's, updating the lease, so. The next thing, so staff is authorized to make filing and resolve conflicts and participate in all processes associated with the COGCC, where staff deems it necessary to protect trust assets. We work all the time with the COGCC and we comment on their rulemaking process. And we work closely with them. We get notices anytime there's any sort of development on land board property. And most of the time we have no concerns, but there's been a few occasions where we may want to file a protest or, have an issue. And we want to make sure we realize that nowhere in policy does it give us authority to be doing that. And so I wanted to make sure that in policy, it was known that we can work with the COGCC and protect our trust assets. And then this is referenced, or what am I saying? This was recommended by our real estate section. When Matt is doing his non-simultaneous exchanges, he's realizing that when purchasers are wanting to do development on the surface that's not compatible with mineral development, if they're going to put a housing development or something, they're wanting these long-term NSOs to protect the surface, no surface occupancy agreements, or what NSOs are. And so he was asking for the right for staff to be able to negotiate these long-term NSOs, and then he will bring the NSO to the board at the same time that he's bringing the non-simultaneous exchange. And the way it currently works is he usually brings the non-simultaneous exchange, gets your approval, and then a few months later goes and gets the long-term no surface occupancy agreement. And so it's just, this is combining the steps. So he would be bringing them to you at the same time. And then the subsurface easements in April and May of this last year. In April, the board approved a form for subsurface easements. And then in May, the board approved the very first request for a subsurface easement. And so I included in your packet the cover sheet back from that May agenda. But back in May, I said, eventually staff would really like the authority to do these, so we won't have to bring these to you. And I'll be bringing it to you at a future date. So here I am at that future date, asking for staff authority to do subsurface easements if it meets these 3 criteria, which I think is pretty protective of the land board. And so if you have any questions on easements, I'm happy to go through it, but not. Then the second part of this is being able to authorize subsurface easements that happened before we had any form in place. So over the last couple of years, if we find that someone drilled one unknowing that they needed to get a document from us, I want to be able to go document that and get a lease in place, a subsurface easement in place. But then we're looking to not charge them anything since we didn't have any procedures or policy in place. We're not looking to really pursue a trespass at this time. So. And then finally, one thing I'd like to add, I sent a letter to you all. I got a letter last night from KOGA in regard to, they had comments regarding something that I didn't highlight here. In particular, it's about our silent shut-in leases. Currently, there's a provision that said, staff has authority to issue a 2-year shut-in, or what? Do you have the language that's redlined? It gave us the right. It gave us the right to do it for longer if staff wanted at our discretion, and we had struck that to align with our current oil and gas lease. The current oil and gas lease gives them 2 years, but there's no staff discretion to give them more. And so you do have, oh, sure.
Before, but all silent shut-in leases will be allowed a maximum shut-in period of 2 years, unless otherwise authorized by staff.
And so we had struck the unless otherwise authorized by staff in writing, because that will now align this with our current oil and gas lease. And so it doesn't preclude anyone from obtaining longer than 2 years. It's just something that would have to come before the board. Staff doesn't have the authority to give them that additional time. And so KOGA was requesting that staff still have that authority. They were saying that they thought coming to the board might just take longer, and in some instances, people may not have that time. I think we are still looking to align the policy with the oil and gas lease, so I wasn't going to propose making that change, but if the board, the board has that discretion. And then I think KOGA said at the end of the letter that ultimately, if you're not going to do it, they would like some sort of statement or some add-in in the policy that you are open to people coming before the board and requesting longer than the 2-year shut-ins on those silent leases. So
just ask for a few moments to consider that request. I'm sorry, I did not see that. Did that come in?
I emailed it probably an hour ago. So, yeah, it's not,
In terms of. Sorry, Assistant Director, I can hold this thought if you'd like to consider the letter first. I was going to ask. I think it's unusual that, I think it's implied that the CETA board can take whatever action they want, and making a statement that says the board can do whatever they want seems contrary to policy.
Yes. Again, there's a lot of flexibility for the commissioners to decide what they want. The main purpose and goal of the policies in general, or at least in this context, is to provide a framework for the delegation of authority to staff. Basically saying what staff has authority to do without taking the time to advise and ask the board for it. It's typically aligned with guidelines for that to keep it as a fairly routine and standard decision-making process. It is never intended to preclude someone from requesting that the commissioners choose to do something different with the trust lands than that they authorize staff to do, sort of like telling your kids they permanently have a permission to be out until 10 o'clock. It doesn't mean the kids can't come back and say, hey, the movie ends late, can I come back at 11 this way? We don't typically add in the language that says you can come to the exceptions, they are policies. Nothing preventing us from doing it, it's just not our typical practice. So I leave it at that. We could certainly add language like that to this policy. We can certainly start adding appropriate language like that to all policies when they come up for review. It doesn't seem necessary, but it's within the realm of possibility. Does that help?
Comments from commissioners? So are we being asked to make a decision?
oh, yes, sorry. Staff recommends that the board approve the changes.
All of those, I'm sorry, are we? Then this last piece, is that part of that board order and every decision, or?
My board order does not include COGA's recommendation, and I even still would stick with my original recommendation.
So I'm just.
But it's as if COGA come here today and take it a moment at the table to say, here are our funds. And so it is open for you to respond to their thoughts and comments as you see appropriate. Staff's recommendation is the same, which is to approve the revisions that don't include any addressing specific addressing COGA comments.
But we will know for the record, we have heard that and taken that into consideration. And I think that the board order, am I right about this, that there's a way to get Katie's? And then is it all in one? Can I miss that?
No, I think this board order is.
Just for this one?
Yeah, it's just for this one, yep.
All right, then I'll entertain a motion. So
Commissioner Froh will try this. I move that the board accept or approve the board order shown here.
you can just say really.
Related to the oil and gas development policy 500-001.
And delegating.
And delegates authority to the director to take the appropriate action consistent with the board's decision.
The motion is from Commissioner Froh, is there a second?
Commissioner Chavez on the second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. I vote affirmatively, it's unanimous vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I don't know that there's any public comment available. But
Oh,
typically
I'm
before we
yeah.
vote, and I know we've always spoken.
All right.
You might check and see if there's any
Thank
public comment. If not, move on. I think there is.
I've erred there, and let me ask, is there any public comment?
Folks listening along online, if you'd like to make comments on this item only to the board, use the raise hand feature and we'll bring you on.
And should there be any, we to reduce it.
No hands, Commissioner.
So I apologize, it is important to always acknowledge public input. All right, moving on, the next item is an exploration permit 113705 and it is.
All right. Thank you again. It's good to see you for another round here, commissioners. For the record, Ben Teschner, the Solid Minerals Manager, and I believe we have Jason Weber from Alianza Minerals on the call as a panelist who can answer questions that may be appropriate for him. All right. So today we're going to be talking about exploration permit 113705 with Alianza Minerals. This is a copper exploration project, so a little different than the typical exploration permits or the usual exploration permits that we issue mostly for things like sand and gravel. And we'll talk about, and that is one of the reasons that this is before you today, is because it is a little bit unique and requires different timelines for that type of exploration work than our typical exploration permits. So from where I sit, exploration permits are really unique. And in truth, these are exploration leases. We're in the leasing business, not the permitting business, but we have chosen to call them exploration permits. But these exploration permits are really uncovering hidden value in our trust. So when we issue these, they are relatively low impact, especially in the context of mining. Fairly small surface disturbance, but has the potential to discover resources that may add substantial values to the trust, and particularly in the context of copper and base metals and things like that. We could be talking about a resource here if everything goes, wonderfully. And I preface that we're in the nascent, very, very nascent stages of this work on this property. But this type of exploration is the type of thing that has the potential to replace a coal mine, right? Or maybe multiple coal mines, depending on how much we're talking from a revenue perspective. This property is located in western San Miguel County. I would take the Pepsi challenge on this is the farthest property to drive to from Denver and of any of our leases. I believe the Google Maps directed me through Moab when I did it. So it is very far, far from Denver and a fantastic drive. I highly recommend it. This is sort of a zoom in on this property as a whole, and I pulled this from Alianza's website. And so just to give you a little bit of orientation here, this is their project as a whole. And the area shown that's I'm blinking here in yellow is the State Land Board parcel. The area surrounding our parcel is all BLM. And so Alianza is holding our exploration lease in addition to some BLM ground as well. And what you're seeing here is the access to this property is from a road just slightly north of this map area, and then a 2-track dirt road that comes in through the BLM onto our property. The red and sort of orange dots that are on this map are the copper occurrences that have been discovered on the property. And so the larger the bubble, the more copper they found in that location, right? So we're in the very nascent stages here, but there's plenty of evidence that there's copper on this property, ours in the BLM. And the question is how much, and is there enough here to justify a full mining operation? Alianza drilled a handful of holes, exploration holes, on this project, which so this is the map I'm about to zoom into here, but this is kind of how it sits in relation to the rest of the project. And so if we zoom in, you can see in sort of the pale green, these are holes that they drilled in 2022. And to the best of the last time I checked, did not have assay results back from those holes. But if assuming the board approves this extension, they would be, they plan to drill at least 2 additional holes on the state land board parcel shown in purple, which would give us a lot more information about what's here, and whether this justifies moving ahead with additional exploration and maybe down the line a mining operation. I want to zoom in on this particular hole right here, because this is one I'm going to show you a picture of, and to show you what this work looks like from actually on the property. So I made that drive through Moab to take this picture, and this is a reclaimed drill pad that was drilled in 2022, and I arrived, I don't know, a handful of weeks after this work was done. And so you can see a relatively small area was cleared here. This is, we're looking at probably less than a quarter acre. That we're not talking about drill pads that are on the scale of oil and gas, where we have a lot of development infrastructure and things. We're pulling in a relatively small rig, drilling a hole and then backing it out. We don't have a lot of surface infrastructure and things like that. And so here you can see that they have replaced a lot of the deadfall that's kind of common in this area, and reseeded and put down straw to promote that seed growth. And so in next spring, we're going to see this pop back up. That straw will decompose, and this will be very, very similar to the existing landscape. Important to note that this permit already exists. Under our solid minerals policy, staff is allowed to issue exploration permits for up to 2 years. And so staff did that in this case. And so this is, given them part of that land package to date. As part of the, then they had the grounds, they have gone and received their DRMS permit to do this exploration work. And they have also received their permit from San Miguel County, conditional use permit, which the current version of which is valid up until March 2025. If they decide they need to continue work, they would apply for an extension with San Miguel County to do that.
So the permit from the county is just for exploration.
Correct. That's right. And to be very clear, the permit, the lease called permit that you are being asked to consider today only permits exploration work. It does not permit any mining activity. And should we get to that point, you will hear that again and if they continue to do that work, one of the great things about exploration permits is we can issue this with relatively small surface impacts, get information about what is really there, and we can call on the lessee at the time of considering a mining lease to say to us, what does this look like, and let's consider it with more information in the future.
Yes. Would this, if it went to production, would it be open pit or do you?
I couldn't
no
say.
idea?
Yeah, we don't know that, right? And so that's one of the things that we would need to figure out going forward. When we issued this exploration permit, this is some of that work that Mindy was doing behind the scenes, right? So, and helping us out with. So when we considered this exploration permit as staff, we reached out to Parks and Wildlife and the other stakeholders and included stipulations for to protect the elk winter range. So there's no, the lessee is not allowed access to this property between December 1 and April 30th, apart from existing roads. This is in sort of the periphery of some sage grouse habitat. And so we've included in this exploration lease that they must follow federal guidelines regarding sage grouse management. This is in the public access program as well. And so we've included a stipulation to that they must safely secure equipment such that if it is encountered by the public, it will not be a safety hazard. And we've also included a stipulation that they may only have one active drill pad drilling one active drill at a time. And so this, reduces sort of the high, if you had maybe two or three drills going on at the same time, that would be a substantially higher impact than having one and then moving it to the next location. So staff is recommending that the board extend this exploration permit with Alianza Minerals, give them 4 more years to do this work, see what's there. And should this, it justify, moving forward, bring it back to us at that time and say, we have some more information and we'd like to see what we can do. The standard rate for these is $5 an acre. And so this would be extended at that rate. Happy to take any questions.
Questions?
Yes.
Mr. Crowe, for my edification, since they already have permits, what is it that takes so long? Is it mobilizing the drills or is it doing research or?
So base metals exploration projects typically take many years and sometimes even decades. The reason for that is that in order to prove out a deposit, you need to drill an awful lot of holes. It's really expensive. And so it's both expensive and time consuming. So should this, for example, they've put, was it 5 holes? Jason's on the call here and he can give a little better answer probably specific to this project. But in general, these are projects that take an awful long time because it's very capital intensive to do it. And so you typically raise that capital in phases.
Okay.
And, should the results of the previous phase justify continuing, all right, you can return to that market and say, we have some good results and we think it justifies moving forward. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I will invite Jason if he has anything to, Jason and Gabriel Sweet is here as well, also from Alianza.
Jason, do you have any comments that you'd love to make?
Thank you for considering this. I think probably my only comment would be Ben, I think, hit the nail on the head. It's very capital intensive, and just to follow on what he said about results, we did get some results back just recently from the program. We didn't make a discovery of a new copper deposit, but we got some encouraging indications. So our process now is to spend the winter period looking at the results, figuring out what exactly we want to do next on the property. It will be drilling, but we don't have that plan in place, and we don't have the funds in place to take that program, whatever it may look like, forward. But it would be something in the scale of I'm just guessing of what we did this year. 5 holes probably minimum, maybe 10 to 15 on the maximum side, but that's yet to be determined.
Jason, I'm sorry, and I erred. I should ask you also to identify yourself.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you very well there.
Yeah, Jason, could you just identify yourself for our records, official records?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Jason Weber. I'm president and CEO of Alianza Minerals, and I actually have Rob Duncan, our vice president of exploration, here with me and at the same computer.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any comments regarding this information? Yes, Commissioner.
Again, one quick question. Assuming this is approved for 4 years, should findings be negative, does Alianza have the opportunity to terminate this lease? Okay.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, with any of our leases, our lessee can terminate them at any time.
Right. Willing to consider a motion?
I'll be happy to. This is Commissioner Clark. I move to approve extension of exploration program number 113705 per the board order presented in our packets.
Second.
I'll second.
All right, there's been a motion by Commissioner Clark, a second by Commissioner Foote. All right, is there any public comment?
Anyone from the public, if you'd wish to make a comment to the board on this particular item, please use your raise hand feature. Commissioner Breton, raise hands.
Thank you. Recognizing no public comment, we'll proceed. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Aye. Votes affirmatively. So unanimous.
Thank you.
All right, well, next is.
Good morning, Commissioners. Greg Okish, Assistant Director. I was in front of you last month and asked for some IND funding for a project in Eagle County. You approved that funding, but it was, we asked for it on short notice. And so I said I would come back and give you more background on that request. And then since I'm here, ask for some more money. Oh, there we go. So I think at the highest level, what we're trying to do on this property is to set the stage for the possibility of workforce housing development in the future. The property's in Eagle County. And zooming in or coming a little closer, you can see Vale. That yellow line that is running right through the middle of this is I-70. So you've got Vale to the south, you've got Minturn. This is, Avon. And this blue section is a state section. This red piece is the Dowd Junction portion of that section. And in this slide, this is above I-70 looking to the east. And generally, it's a little hard to get a shape around. We're talking about some existing facilities, CDOT facilities that are really in this part of the slide. And then some of the land, the Eagle River is running right through this wooded sort of area. And this more gently sloping area just north of the Eagle River is the redevelopment area we're looking at. Again, so here's I-70 running through the center of the state section. The land south of I-70 is, for the most part, undevelopable due to some really unstable geologic conditions. So we're not looking, we've looked at it previously, we're not looking at it now. The green area on the slide is the CDOT right-of-way that we discuss in your memo. And then a portion of this pink area, again, right here, is the opportunity, if you will, on the north side of the Eagle River. I think the memo talks a little bit about some preliminary studies we did, and this is one of the outputs of that effort. What we were looking at the time is this is the CDOT, oops, let me go back to this slide. This is the CDOT maintenance facility, sort of what that looks like. This is the CDOT employee housing that's talked about. It's really a set of trailers that have been put on permanent foundations, and there's 11 or 12 of them on the property. And you see them here in the aerial photo. These are the trailers. This is the maintenance facility. And the study we did a few years ago, in part, was to see if we could get a road through in between those two, so that if CDOT, the facilities were not removed, could we get in between them? And was there any development opportunity on the north side of the river and actually the north side of these railroad tracks? So we got a number of issues to deal with. How do we get across the river? How do we get across the railroad tracks? And then is there enough developable land on that north side to make it worthwhile to get there? And the general indication was it's worth further investigation. Certainly the lower hanging fruit, the easily developed land is the land where the CDOT facilities are right now. And that's been a barrier to moving anything forward until just recently. And I can't remember if I have a slide for this, so I'm going to talk about it now. What's changed recently is the governor's office has, through the Office of the Public-Private Partnerships, has requested funding in the current budget that would allow for the relocation of the residential employee housing. So we're starting down a track where land incrementally could become available for development. The other component to this that's talked about, discussed in your memo, is there's a question about where these CDOT maintenance facilities might go. We originally worked with CDOT a number of years ago to acquire, this is just north of Minturn. So Minturn is off the bottom of this slide. We acquired this site that's highlighted in blue as a potential relocation site for CDOT's maintenance facilities. They have some concerns about it. It's really issues of, this is a really steep slope right here, and there's some rockfall. There's been a geotechnical study. We've identified the potential for rockfall. It can be mitigated, but it will be more expensive to mitigate it if there are buildings that are occupied by humans in this blue square than it would be if, for instance, it was just a maintenance yard with only interim human occupation. So it turns out Vail Resorts owns this red parcel, this long skinny red parcel. That's where they have their current, what ski areas always call their boneyard. It's where they put all the stuff they don't use anymore, and they can't figure out where else to put it. So we're exploring with Vail Resorts and CDOT the potential of swapping sites here. Vail would get the blue site or some portion of the blue site. CDOT would get the red site, and then they would potentially relocate some or all of their maintenance facilities to that property. So it's sort of a linked proposal.
Great. Is that site where there's a little shopping center in there?
No. This is all just, I'm sorry, this is, let's see, the railroad tracks run through here. There's almost always a couple of trains parked in here. And this is just like old ski lifts and stuff they use in the summer, maybe, but they don't, storage containers, very industrial. I don't have a photograph of it. So no, there's nothing. I'm trying to think if there's a little, there's nothing up here that I can think of as a landmark. Okay.
I guess I was thinking.
So the process, the funds you approved last month allowed us to hire 3 consultants, and we needed that outside expertise to advance these studies. We really need to take a much closer now look at the existing CDOT facilities, really test getting across the river and sort of what kind of development capacity this site actually has. So we can start running a pro forma that says, gee, you could build here, but it's so expensive to build here, it makes no sense. Or if only these 2 things could be, perhaps these, we could work with the counties to modify some setbacks or, increase some height limits. This becomes a feasible project. So we need to start conversations with partners or potential partners. And to do that, we need some outside expertise. And the 4 consultants we have currently working are doing wetland delineation, wildlife studies. All of this is on the Dow Junction site, the existing CDOT lands, land planning, and some planning level civil engineering. We're talking to the water district about whether or not they can and will serve. If all of that goes well, we would immediately start a process of what I've called stakeholder engagement. Director Ryan and I have met with various representatives in the valley, the housing authorities, both in Vail and Eagle County. We met with the Eagle County manager a couple months ago. There's certainly great interest in this project and the opportunity it represents. The advice we've been given is we need to get a number of people around the table, specifically probably Minturn, Vale, Eagle County, Avon, some of the larger employers like the hospital and maybe the schools. And if there's opportunity here, then start talking about how that opportunity might start to address their needs for workforce housing. And the questions out of that would be, well, what's the preferred jurisdiction? Do we want to be in the county? Does the county want us to be in the county? Avon, do they want us to be in Avon? Or do we want, so what's the best jurisdiction to be in? What sort of zoning entitlements might we need? What's the process for getting those? How do we accomplish a railroad crossing, or actually 2 or 3? That preliminary plan actually anticipates cross. That railroad has been abandoned for years, but UP has not let go of it. And until they do, we still have to go through a process of getting permissions for crossings and utility service, which I mentioned.
And where would make the most sense for utilities?
To provide water and sanitation, I would guess is Eagle Valley Water and Sand.
There's the metro district right there that serves the community. So that's probably the logical one, but we need to just test it all.
And we have a meeting set up with them in January to have a conversation. So the cost and the budget, and this comes directly out of your memo. I tried to give you a range. It's hard to say exactly what might be required, but what you approved in last month is highlighted here in green. It's $150,000 to do the phase 1 planning and feasibility testing. What's highlighted in yellow in a range of $50,000 to $100,000 is that what I just described as the stakeholder discussions, to engage in those. And it's the funding is there because what we anticipate is during those discussions, there will be a need to revise and refine the plans, the preliminary plans. And so we need a little bit of money for planning consultants who can sit with us shoulder to shoulder in those meetings and make the adjustments or answer the questions that are being asked about what if this and what if that. And then finally, the phase 3, which we are not asking for any funding for today, would really be the most expensive piece. That would be the zoning entitlements. If we're successful in the stakeholder engagement and we have a viable project, there's probably at least a year process, if not longer, to get the entitlements and annexation done that would allow us to move forward.
Great, if I can add two points of clarification. First, I think you've used a lot of words to say we need to build a straw man that we can then put in front of all the local stakeholders, whether it's zoning people or whatever. So we're going to spend a lot of money to build a straw man and see what's feasible. The second piece of this is that even if it's super expensive to go to the north side of the Eagle River, the CDOT parcels still represent 10 acres of development opportunity. We don't need any bridges. We don't, there's some amount of zoning there already. So there's still 10 acres of developable land, no matter what, as long as CDOT leaves. And so this work will have some amount of utility on the south side of the river as well. So there's not a scenario in which this is wasted money.
Yeah, that's well said.
And I think we should know this is the fact that it's for workforce housing, and this is a real priority, is something that I think makes this even more important to explore. Commissioner.
Commissioner Foe, question, Greg, on really it seems to me the biggest risk of all of this is CDOT moving, an agreement happening in a time frame in our lifetimes or whatever. So how do we mitigate that risk while we're spending this money? And finding this all out is really helpful, so that's not wasted, but how do we control that risk?
I'll take that one. We've pushed CDOT to move for 7 or 8 years.
My point.
Through 4 directors. We finally developed enough of a plan where you saw the road staking up through there and enough of a vision that, hey, there's 35 acres of land that the governor seized on this. And so the governor has put a funding request into his budget request to the legislature, a portion of which will be earmarked to move the housing part of CDOT. So to begin the process, I expect it will be approved, but that's not done yet. But I'm working closely with the lady who runs public-private partnerships, the governor's staff. And I think once that all starts occurring, you've got the flywheel spinning up there. You're going to get momentum from the locals who see more of the possibility. CDOT's got a 50-year-old facility that's going to need moving. We're fixing it up at some point. So I think there will be momentum to move the rest of it. I can't promise that or guarantee it. But I just, it's on the governor's radar. He's asked for money that would specifically help begin the process.
Adam, in addition, at sort of a more granular level, there's a big complex Gantt chart behind this, but we are not going to start the stakeholder process until the governor's budget is approved. So on this little table, the minimizing the risk is we will spend probably the bulk of the $150,000. We won't start spending the next $100,000 unless the budget's approved, so that there's an indication that there is going to be a site available. Or at least we'll have a decision point there. We won't have plunged in.
On the margin, it seems to me that the stakeholder engagement actually brings many, many more voices and parties to the table.
Spins the flywheel fast.
Yeah.
Yep.
Increase the pressure.
Yep. So concurrently, this next table is for the Minturn Road site. In order to figure out whether or not that's a viable site for CDOT, we've hired a geotechnical engineer. They're going to go drill some holes in January and just learn more about that slope so we can understand how much leveling we could do, what the most cost-efficient way of creating a pad that will meet Vail's needs is. So that is the second part of the budget request, which is the $100,000, up to $100,000 for the Minturn site. And that is part of today's request. So in general, to summarize, you approved $150,000 last month, which we've engaged the consultants, they're doing their work. We are today asking for an additional $200,000. So the total budget for the project would be $350,000 to be spent, incrementally as we start to hit milestones. And I can answer any questions about that. And the board orders here for your convenience. Other questions?
I just want, at the existing CDOT facilities are buried fuel tanks and
Yes.
that kind of ugly stuff.
We will at some point need to get a phase 2 environmental on it. And this is written on a 1963. This right away actually goes back to really the date, almost the same period of time when Vail was founded, 1963. So it's very vague on their responsibilities. We will have to have a discussion with CDOT about who's responsible for removing the buildings, any environmental remediation. That's all down the road.
Big picture, you should know that it's envisioned today, we're not going to be the developer or owner of any of the housing. I could see where we might create some pads and sell some pads, and we might create some pads and lease some pads, similar to how we handled 13th and Sherman. But the work we're doing today, I think, has the potential to significantly increase the value of the land. Raw land has one value, but zoned entitled land that's platted and has maybe utilities available has an exponential
The value and the
larger
velocity
value.
and the velocity. So if we do this groundwork, it should accelerate any development work that comes along afterwards.
So I think that's what we're trying to do here is invest to learn enough about how to really create value for that land so that as we go to sell and lease, we get a better return for the beneficiaries. That's the takeaway on the project. if the governor's budget were to come through, or if there was a problem with CDOT, we have the ability to stop the work as it's happening. But I do think this is valuable work for us to be running concurrent paths with what CDOT and the public-private partnership also do.
And actually to that, and we can obviously discuss the ultimate outcomes later, but I guess through the stakeholder engagement is where one would determine whether or not this was rental or for sale housing. Or do we know that already?
I think it'd be, we don't know that answer, and I think we'd want to talk up there about, what kind of permanence do you want to have? Do you want this to become a community like a Miller Ranch or some of the other projects you've seen up there where you've got a mix of for sale and for rent?
Right.
It's certainly big enough that I think everybody needs to think about this as a neighborhood. This is a place that's a destination, a neighborhood scale destination where people live and have some services and
All right. I'm open to.
Sorry, Commissioner. I apologize for not asking in the lead up. I just want to make sure that the board order as presented, we're handling this as a separate chunk of money for IND as opposed to truly an expansion of last month's.
I believe I wrote it as an additional chunk of money.
And I want to get better about catching the fact that we have our default language in the bottom of the order that says it'll be used within 2 years.
Mhm.
Is that timing sufficient to?
That is for this tranche, yes.
Good questions. All right, is there any further maybe prior to a motion? We'll need to accept a motion at that time.
This is Commissioner Chavez. I move we approve the Dow Junction Investment Improvement Fund request as presented in the board package.
Second. Second, and is there any public comment on this item?
Members of the public, if you'd like to make comment on this particular item, please use the raise hand feature. No raised hands.
All right, and we'll just note for the record, there's been clarification that the timing on this is a separate item from the earlier IND allocation last month. So with that clarification, all those in favor of the board order indicate by saying aye. Aye. With votes affirmative, motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck with this. Right.
You again, I'm sweet. I represented it 6 months.
So please see.
Right. Crystal Crandon, Minerals Director. I will also have a investment and development fund request for you, but in regard to our geologic carbon capture storage program. So I think we're really wanting to make empowered decisions on behalf of the trust. In this market, there is so many unknowns and it's so new. I think we realize that we want, in order to craft our lease and make the best decisions and negotiate, we just want to have as much information as possible. So throughout this presentation, you'll see me use the term CCS. And again, that stands for carbon capture storage. And we're talking about geologic CCS here. So where you store it underground. I have a little picture here just as a reminder of this process. So an industrial facility normally would just vent or flare CO2 into the atmosphere. But with CCS, you would capture it on site. And then you would look to either utilize it. That's in this little picture, they're showing some of it's being utilized to make cement, and then the rest of the CO2 would be liquefied and injected underground. So this specific picture is a source emitter where you're directly at the source, capturing it and then injecting it. This other type is called a DAC, direct air capture. So this machine could be out anywhere. It would just be on top of the geology where you want to inject it, but it would pull directly out of the atmosphere carbon. and then you could inject it. So one thing to note, the DAC technology exists, but right now it's not really feasible. And so the projects that we're seeing are more of that direct emitter type, but this technology is coming and, they're expecting it will be feasible soon.
And Crystal, where it's been tested, are there any seismic impacts from that?
Well, that's one of the main things that they test. There's only 2 geologic storage projects going on in the US right now. And to my knowledge, I don't think there's been any seismic impacts from those, but it's something that is like highly monitored and regulated and tested. So
I was reading, is there one going up in Texas, like $1 billion?
yeah.
There's that's really not too far away.
Yeah, there's a big one that's being developed in Texas, and there's one in Wyoming that's looking to get up and going. And
Did you say billion?
Billions, yeah. It's a big.
What's driving this market? First, I wanted to explain what a carbon credit is. So one carbon credit is the same as either avoiding or removing 1 metric ton of CO2. So either removing it from the atmosphere or preventing it from entering the atmosphere. That equals 1 carbon credit. So what do you do with these carbon credits? You can sell, buy, and trade them on a market. So there is a compliance market. This would be set by the government. So right now in the US, we have a compliance market in California, where, for instance, let's say the California government says, in this industry, you can only emit 10 tons of carbon. If a company is emitting 12, they have to go to that market and buy 2 credits, whatever amount they're over that cap. So it's a cap and trade system. So on the other hand, if a company is only emitting 8, they have 2 extra that they can go sell on the market. So it creates a market for buying and selling of these credits, and it's regulated by the government. So we don't have a compliance market here in Colorado.
So Crystal, when they buy it, do they have to buy it within a certain region? I mean, if you're emitting in California, you have to buy it there? I mean,
yeah. So for that particular market, they would want the offsets to be done in that state too. If you're going to take carbon out, you would need to be showing that it's there.
So for this to work, it would have to be that Colorado entities would be willing to buy those carbon credits here?
No. So for us, what we're looking at is a voluntary market right now because we don't have a compliance market. So right now, the market that's growing here in Colorado and worldwide is a voluntary market. And this would be where companies like Amazon or whoever, they say, we want to be green. We want to have a 0 carbon footprint. And so we are going to calculate how many emissions we're creating. And then we're going to go to this voluntary market and buy those and offset it. So that would be what's happening right now in Colorado and what's growing. The government may set up some sort of a compliance market here, but right now it doesn't exist. But this voluntary market is expanding rapidly. And some analysts estimate that by 2030, it could be upward of $50 billion. So there's a lot of money at stake. It's very new, but it's growing. Another thing driving this market are tax incentives. So right now, the federal government offers $85 a ton for every ton injected geologically from a source emitter, and they offer $180 a ton for every ton of CO2 that's stored from a DAC, from one of those direct air capture facilities. So there's a lot of money tax-wise that can be had. So a status of where we're at, in 2021, we hired the School of Mines to analyze all of our state land board geology to see where we have good potential for carbon storage. And we did our first exploration lease with Carbon America in January of 2022. And then staff went and has had meetings with other land boards that are leasing for CCS. So we've met with Texas, Louisiana, North Dakota, Wyoming. We really wanted to figure out, what do your leases look like? How are you structuring yours? What are the risks? Are you doing RFPs? Are you directly negotiating? Just trying to learn as much as we can about how they're leasing. And some of the big takeaways, it's just, there's a lot of unknowns. The value in these leases and the amount you can charge varies greatly. And we're seeing, you know, some of it could be related to the geology. You know, if the geology is really great here and you can store a ton, you might be able to charge more than you could in a different region where the geology is not as good. But there's no standardized lease template. Every single state is doing it different. Some different structures, different pricing. There's no transparency, like from industry. They're not telling us what they're negotiating with private landowners, and those aren't recorded anywhere. And then these costs vary widely. Some of these projects are in the billions of dollars. So it's hard to find a profit margin. It could be hundreds of millions. It could be, you know, very slim. There's just a lot of unknowns. And so that is where we came to Creek Bank Associates. They are a company that they really helped with our eco services line of business. And they had some experts on staff that helped with that. And so we reached out to them, and they have experts on staff that are actually in the CCS industry. So we can finally talk to someone that's on the other side of the table and learn a little bit more about costs, pricing structures, where is that profit margin? How can we negotiate and get in this market and not be too high or too low? And so that's what we're really hoping to find out from Creek Bank.
Are there any questions?
I'm just curious on the Colorado School of Mines, was it a pretty decent report they provided or?
Yes, it's a really robust report. And the biggest takeaway, or the biggest thing that I wanted out of it, was a GIS map that will rank our lands, you know, kind of good storage potential or don't store here, avoid this area. And we could put it on our map server to kind of start advertising. And that's the component that we haven't gotten yet, that we're still working with them, trying to wrap up. But yes, the report is very robust.
And to that point, it looks like there was a lot of opportunity on state landlords, on state trust lands.
Yes, there is, yeah.
Any further discussion? If not, I'm open to the motion. And let me just make one small typo in the motion, just a tiny little change. It should be CCS, not CS.
Oh, that is correct, yes.
Open to a motion.
Just got through everyone, didn't it?
Oh, this one's not so long, so, okay, we'll just read it. I move to approve the use of up to $90,000 funding funds to Mary Creek Bank Associates to help staff obtain relevant CS industry information, minimize CS leasing risks, and optimizing regional benefits for trust. Moved by Commissioner Clark, so your second.
Commissioner Thomas, I'll second.
All right. Is there any public comment on this motion?
Do you have a draft motion?
Yeah.
Position to the recommendation?
It's like,
Yeah.
is that what we would?
The draft, that's gonna have all this.
Yeah, okay.
Apparently it was wrong on the motion.
Thank you. Here we go.
Or on the board.
But the components of the motion itself are somewhat missing.
Oh,
Okay,
Which is
so
okay, just want to make sure we can all.
I rescind that motion. All right.
I'll
motion
rescind my
rescinded and seconder has been
Okay.
drawn.
I move to approve the investment and development fund request for the CCS business program as pursuant to the board order as presented.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded with the revision on the letters in the motion. And is there any public comment? Hearing none. Let's for a vote on this. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Chair votes affirmatively. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And we have. Thanks. We have a very quick review of the leasing agenda.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners. Andy Bissett, Transactions and Record Services Manager. We have the December board leasing agenda for your review and approval. There are 2 bids this month, 1 agriculture, 1 recreation. And there are 4 new leases, 1 agriculture, 2 road access permits, and 1 recreation. Happy to answer any questions, but staff recommends approval of the December board leasing agenda.
Questions? Leasing agenda. Hearing none, is there a motion? I move to leasing agenda.
I move to approve the board leasing agenda for December 2022 as presented in our packet.
Is there a second?
A second.
Moved in second. Is there any public comment?
Sorry, I didn't ping from lots of different directions. Anybody from the public wishing to make a comment on this item in particular? Please use the raise hand feature on your computer.
Considering board leasing agenda.
No hands, Commissioner.
All right, there's no public comment. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye. Aye. Chair. It's unanimous vote. Thank you very much. And the final item is review of the minutes. Is there any comment on the minutes of the previous meeting? Hearing none, we'll ask for, I guess, unanimous consent that the minutes are correct as given. And so I think we're in good shape. Now, maybe we can just confirm one question for you. Did we have a 2-day meeting in January?
We do not, it will be one day, Wednesday, January 11th.
Okay, and how long days?
Right now, it's not that bad, and the rest of the item is the big one, so I think it's probably early to mid afternoon.
Okay.
But maybe.
So we'll be on the 11th.
Yes, I will ask, I'm asking Rachel to remove the 12th from their calendars. Thank you.
Great. And and then just for the rest of the day, Bill, we want to share with the commissioners what to expect.
Yeah.
What's done this week.
Okay, commissioners, go upstairs, grab lunch. We've got awards for staff and awards and videos for some great lessees. We give 4 annual lessee awards, and those lessees are all here. Please go and meet them as well. Rachel, did I miss anything?
The only thing is, before can you guys, Kristen has asked me to ask all of you to head straight upstairs for a quick photo and then to go back down and grab your lunch before. So,
Okay, so yeah, I encourage you to talk to the lessees while you're up there. Thanks so much.
Well done, commissioners. We got 6 minutes to do that.
I've got a lot of questions that I'm gonna have to take on the road now.